We can't hear anything. I didn't at all hear the pledge or the call to order for the meeting.
I was a little late on mute, but can you hear now?
Can you hear us now?
Yes,
Okay. Well,
thank you.
we'll assume you know the words on the pledge. So, all right, sorry about that. Thanks for telling us. So I don't think we have any recommended agenda adjustments. Are there any other requests for agenda adjustments? We'll go ahead and move on. I would make a motion to approve the minutes from February 1st, 2022 as presented. Is there a second? I'll second. Any discussion or corrections? We'll go ahead and vote. We'll do a roll call vote. So Beth?
I'm abstaining.
Jake?
Aye.
Patrick? Aye. Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Next up, we have warrants. I would make a motion to approve payroll warrant 15, regular warrant 15, and ban warrant 20. Is there a second? I'll second. Any discussion? We'll take a roll call. Beth?
Brian, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Are those in the folder on the Google? folder?
They are not in the folder. They would have been
Okay.
circulated by Lynn previously.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure I was referencing the right ones.
Yeah.
So the ones from last week.
Yes.
Okay. Aye. Thank you.
Thank you. Jake?
Aye.
Patrick? Aye. Mark? Aye. Also vote aye. Next up is public comment. The floor is open for public comment. Not seeing anybody unmute. Last call for public comment. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. Next up is acknowledgements. Beth?
Hi, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge all of the work that everybody has done at all levels to contribute to the equity audit work that we just met about in the workshop session. And overall, just the continued challenging times and everybody's work doing that as well. So thank you.
Okay.
Nothing at this time.
Patrick? I guess I'd just like to acknowledge, I know you all saw it as the negative side, which is that ASA was closed one day last week, but an enormous amount of work, including a lot of our contractors, all really stepped up and did a lot of things on very short notice and late at night, and especially Bill Cody, who's sitting here in the room, did a lot of work, and I know Meredith was very involved too, to get that turned around. It was, it was obviously a regrettable situation, but in the end, not really anybody's fault particularly, but getting that turned around was really appreciated. Thank you. Mark? I've got nothing. Okay.
I would just, I'm sorry, were you?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Meredith.
I echo what you said about last week's outage at ASA, but also I just want to acknowledge student groups that are meeting and thriving and having opportunities that our students didn't have altogether last year. And so I want to acknowledge, the sponsors who are making that happen. And, the fact that it's one of the aspects, I think, of our programming that is really valued to serve like complete students and all of their interests and passions. So I'm just really pleased that we have staff, working with students and trying to move forward all of these opportunities in as normal a way as possible, given the circumstances we still find ourselves in.
And next up, we have reports. Start with director reports. Lisa, you want to go?
So were we gonna?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just given the length of the meeting, I think we're gonna just, the reports are filed with us to read. Are there any questions? Let's start with Lisa. Are there any questions or comments for Lisa from the report?
And I would say with Lisa's report, a number of the data points in that will likely be pertinent in our budget discussion, but is there any clarifications that she can provide? And Meredith, I just put that in the folder prior to our meeting, so you may have not seen that. but she indicated there's nothing new particularly. It's an update on themes that she's been reporting on the last couple of months.
Any questions for Meredith or Lisa? Thank you for getting those in advance so that we can move the meeting forward. It just does look like a long meeting, especially with a late start. Next up, we have the superintendent report.
So I have several things to mention to you tonight. On the call tonight, I'm just looking around the room. Oh yes, Chris Crocker's on the call tonight. And as you may recall, we're taking a group of students to Ecuador right around April vacation. Chris Crocker and Angela Slate are going on the trip with these students. And last we spoke, we talked about continuing approval of this trip before an important deadline back in the fall around final payment and cancellation timelines. And we indicated we would come back to if there was a change. And in late January, there was a change with the level designation of Ecuador, as well as many places in that region around COVID. And so we are coming back to you today to report that and to indicate that after talking with the company, they're still successfully taking trips and have testing protocols in place and mitigation strategies that they still feel comfortable taking student groups. When Brian and I talked about this prior to the meeting, I think, Brian, you looked up the data on where Ecuador is. Do you want to just mention that in this context?
Yeah, I mean, Ecuador had a bit of a spike and a drop that pretty closely paralleled the US trend. In other words, we're on the downside of the spike. But the height of the spike, who knows how reporting standards compare and things, but certainly even the US reporting's been much worse than usual this last time around. But from the data we have, the spike was about, if I recall, it was a quarter of the height of the US spike and half the height of the spike in Maine. So, it's literally, at least just by the case loads per 100,000, it's a safer place to be than Maine right now. So there remained a crime concern in the far northern reaches, which they're not going into. But and honestly, 2/3 of the countries in the world right now are at level 4 on the State Department list. Every country in South America except for Chile was. And I think the State Department's been pretty cautious at this point in interpreting international travel, given the levels here at home in the state of Maine and the country of the US. So, like I say, Ecuador has lower caseloads reported than we have here in Maine right now.
Chris is on the call tonight. If we have any questions or concerns that we want to raise or bring forward.
It continues to be a voluntary trip. Vaccinations are required. It seems to me, I can't see a compelling reason not to let it go forward. You said vaccinations are required? I think by the company, or maybe it's by the Ecuador.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a new rule that just instituted a couple of months ago. The students had to be vaccinated. When we first signed up, or when we spoke last to the board, they did not have to be vaccinated. So we did lose some travelers who decided not to vaccinate because they didn't want to have to do that to go. So they have to be vaccinated to go.
And we do have 2 staff members going as another level of just precaution in the event that someone has to, isolate. There's a staff that can stay behind so the student's not left alone.
And just to clarify, in addition to the COVID, right, we were talking about the State Department's caution, right, increased caution. And I'm on their website now, and it names Karachi and Sucumbíos, as well as, Brian, you mentioned northern provinces. So just to kind of clarify, will the school trip be visiting those locations?
No, we're just going to Quito and to the islands down.
Okay.
Yep, to Galapagos.
Thank you. You may have told us that last meeting, and I apologize that I don't remember. Okay,
some real important steps related to security, both for Russia and the United States.
So we're not, I'm requesting a vote, but I'm not hearing anybody speaking up wanting the trip not to go ahead. So have a great trip.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chris. So another item, I just wanted to give an update on the situation last week at ASA with the flooding and the power outage. And Bill's here and can clarify anything as well. So just some explanation on what happened. The new transformer that's out behind the school at ASA, which is just like the one that's in front of the school at middle school, a little different size. When it was installed last spring, Versant required there to be by code a drainage pipe out from the transformer to run off any water that was in that encasing. And then from the transformer, there's also conduit running into the school to the distribution panel. So there's conduit from the transformer, wires running through this conduit to the distribution panel. And so what happened is this drainage pipe goes out kind of beyond like where the dumpsters sit out to the area right in front of the ditch behind ASA. And there's an area back there that I'm told many winters forms a pond. And it's never really caused an issue for us. It's just been there, probably something that, if it got to a certain point, it would have caused a problem, but we really haven't had any features back there where this was problematic. So that happened recently. And what began to happen is water found its way into this drainage pipe and had nowhere to go to drain because the drainage for this area was frozen over, was ultimately what was found to be causing this. And so because there was this growing, with the melt and the snow that we had and the rain, it was finding its way into this pipe through everything and into the distribution panel, into the basement, or that's not a basement, to the kind of mechanical room at ASA. And we couldn't stop it, we couldn't get it under control. Everything was iced over and really ran out of daylight to be able to investigate what was happening back there to cause it to come in at such a rate. So Versant decided they needed to cut power to the school until we could get the water flow under control. And so the next morning, with the help of Bowman and one of the subcontractors on Thibodeau, as well as Black Bear, Lawn Care was a big help through that process as well, and the night before to perform some investigation. It was determined that there was a grate that was freezing over that should be where all of this water is going. And I think that has happened every winter. But as I said, it's never really been an issue until there was this new pipe that it was finding its way in. So that was drained and cleared. And Bill now, has to, for the rest of this winter, work to maintain that, that clearance over that grate as we get snow or ice, to make sure that grate is draining. We're talking, we had a follow-up conversation this morning with CHA and Bowman to see if they have any solutions for either the pipe itself and where it terminates, or looking at some of the solution for that back area. So, short-term solution, keep that grate clear, make sure it's draining. Long-term solution, we'd rather make sure that should there be a backup of water, it's not going to find its way into the school in that way again. So that's what happened. And once it, we got the water draining, everything was fine to turn back on, no damage to anything. But there was a lot of water coming in. We had a lot of precipitation that day, and we had a lot of snow back there already that had built up, and some ice. So there was a lot of water with nowhere to go except through this pipe into that, through that pathway into the mechanical work. So would you add anything to that?
So I'm working with Rob Yerkes as well, the city. There's the structure up there, nobody knows where that dumps into. You know, the structure's there, we don't have any, we have no idea where it's at. The city doesn't have any idea. So we talked today, so we're gonna try to snake it and put a camera down and possibly do some dye testing. There's two possibilities. It could be just dumping into a field somewhere and into a reservoir that nobody knows about. The other possibility is dumping into, it's not dumping in the stormwater. They've opened the grates up and they haven't seen anything there. But it could be also dumping into the sewer side of the house. If that's the case, it's a whole other issue that we will have to work with the city on to try to fix. So before we can go, not before we can fix the major fix, we also need to know downstream as we start. If we pipe into that structure, we need to know downstream where that's going, what's happening. So Rob Yerkes has stepped up. He's helped us out quite a bit in this process, as well as the fire department. We didn't have any sump pumps. I fixed that situation now. Fire department come up with some sump pumps and some hoses. So the whole city jumped in to help us. So it was a good time. A lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, trial by fire again for Bill to, you know, problem solve the situation. But again, you know, I see John's on the call. John Harper, his crew were really helpful through that process, and the other partners we mentioned, just to, you know, we tried everything we could think of to try to prevent having to, you know, kill power to the school for that day, but it just, we couldn't make another choice when we investigated it. So, you know, I think we know enough now that we can prevent it from happening again in the short term with some ongoing just monitoring, but long term, we want another solution. So currently working on it. So if there aren't any other questions about that, we just had the Equity Alliance presentation. One of the things that we need to think about is the committee, the Equity Action Planning Group, whatever we want to call it. But you know, we've had different groups working on initiatives and still have groups working on initiatives, but we really need to form a group that's going to roll up their sleeves, dive into all the data that we've been provided. And as we learned today, you know, there's a lot of follow-up investigation and inquiry that needs to happen to really determine, you know, what our next steps should be. And so you saw they recommend a group of around 15 to 18. As you know, we've been meeting with them. It really, you know, reminds us what they describe works well is kind of how we form some of our district level, district administrator hiring committees, you know, kind of mirroring that stakeholder representation model. I think, Brian, you mentioned like the superintendent search committee size and kind of representation with parents, stakeholders, staff, administrator, student representatives. So that's something just to begin thinking about. And I do think, you know, perhaps next meeting we'll put an agenda item in just to have a little more discussion about the formation of that committee. Does that sound good, Brian, to take that step?
Yeah.
So just be thinking about that between now and then. And I know we're going to have a couple of new board members, not next meeting, but there'll be a meeting after that. So, you know, we probably want to think about 2 board members, I'm thinking, for this particular committee. We may even want to kind of make it a standing committee that's going to be, you know, on the subcommittee reports for subsequent meetings. So any other comments about that? The last thing I wanted to mention, it really does tie into our budget discussion, but one of the things that we've been talking about for next year is space at ASA. As you know, we had to add a 4th classroom this year for kindergarten. So we have a couple of different grade levels that have 4 classrooms. As we look at programs and services growing, we are exploring the idea of holding on to the back portable for another year, not the one on the side, that's the larger one, that one is actually more problematic to hold on to. It's actually on town land partly. We had to get an easement to work with the town on having that there. The one out back is smaller, and it can provide some specialist space that we're looking for next year while we're waiting on the old kitchen and some space right there to be renovated that will kind of ease some pressure. So that's just something I want to mention, as it's not contemplated in our budget right now because we were still gathering some prices on that. The back portable offers, it gives 3 different spaces, 2 that have doors that can be closed. It's perfect for kind of a small group setting, and then 1 larger area in the middle. The cost is not cheap. It's $12.50 a month, which for 12 months is $15,000. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. But as we look around at spaces, it's just not appropriate to have some of these programs like in the greenhouse where they really need a more less distracting, quiet, private space to provide some of the programming and services that we are looking for space for next year. So that's just something I want to put out there, that the price, they gave us a price to purchase and a price to lease. I'm not interested in a purchase. And it was, I think the purchase price was $52,000. But I really, and talking with Kristen, talking with Lisa, that we really think 1 year can bridge that gap and at least, help us get through until we get this other space renovated and usable. So that's just putting in a little more explanation for something that is not in the budget right now, and something that we're still considering, and so it might appear in the budget as a request next round. I think that's everything I had on my list. Ready to shift into
Good discussion, yep.
Last meeting, we looked at and I thought I printed it somewhere, the return to school plan that we are supposed to review and, formally review every 6 months as a board. Last meeting, we identified a couple of places in that document where we felt for it to stand up kind of as a document that would work over time, we should really remove just a couple of places. I know it's in here somewhere. Here it is. So it's sorry, I didn't organize my materials. Okay. In the top section, we talked about just removing the reference to the July 9th iteration and July 27th iteration of the CDC guidance. And then on page 2, in number 8, under the health and safety guidance, we have just struck everything after the first sentence because that too was dated with a reference to July 21 guidance. And we feel like that item just is fine to stand with just that first sentence referencing basically that we follow guidelines for responding to positive cases in alignment with the SOP. Those were the only 2 changes. Any feedback, comment?
Is the, I was not at the last board meeting, so I'm kind of playing a little catch up. So is I think you just said this, Meredith, but I want to confirm that this would kind of stand so that it doesn't need to be updated, perhaps, hopefully in the next like 6 months and maybe even kind of after that. Is that the case? Because there are points there about like reopening or like the new academic year or like next year. So I don't know if we want to take those out.
Okay. Yes, I think we were trying to take out references that kind of pointed to guidance that's no longer the most recent.
Okay.
And yes, we were trying to make this a document that was more, that would hold up through the end of the year. So if you see some other places where we should strike items,
I see under the hybrid / remote learning, it's a small edit, but kind of still supports, kind of harkens back to, the beginning of the school year. So the last full sentence, families who are looking for a long-term full remote program next year should explore external options. I'm thinking if we remove next year.
yep, that's a good suggestion, I think.
And then there's under the social and emotional support. I don't know if we just want to leave it for like staggering the opening days for students transitioning. That part I get, transitioning into new school buildings, it's the second part, and fostering re-engagement in the first few weeks of school. I guess I could see how that would be relevant still. But I just wanted to draw your attention to it in case that was just a space that didn't come up last meeting.
Yeah, I think I like leaving that part in because it just reflects kind of what we did as we started the year to provide support. So I could go either way on that one. I think the next year definitely needs to be stricken. I don't know if others have thoughts. That's helpful. Thank you. Anything else?
Okay, it's my like Uber editing. just some notes on the what page? Sorry, I guess it's the third page. When you have a moment, I don't have, editing. So just the consistency of using periods at the end of sentences in that transportation, performing arts, music, parent volunteers, meetings, those bold areas.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I mean, I think we needed to discuss with the board. Do we necessarily need to vote on this?
It needed to just be on the agenda and have for review. So I think if everyone agrees on these changes, we can simply make these changes to the document and repost to the website. So. Okay, so also under this item, I wanted to just mention, I think it's, I'm sure that a number of you are following the data, the two dashboards that we have available. I was just going to show. Where things stand with our counts. I hesitate to say this. This was the first, because I don't want to cause things to change, but today was the first day, the first school day in a long while that we didn't have a positive case. We sometimes go a weekend day, I think, I can't remember if that happened this weekend actually, but this was kind of a milestone day, and Karen and I were afraid to even say it out loud when it got to 3 o'clock, and I called her and said, did I miss something? Did something happen? So anyway, I think that this is representative though of what we're starting to see in the graph, but I think more time will help us see if we are kind of following the trend that started to happen other places where the wave hit a little earlier than it hit here, whether this is an indication of that for us. It certainly would be nice if it is, and it's already been a nice change. So I just wanted to point this out to say that it's an encouraging trend that we're seeing, and we certainly can reference back to this and other discussions that I want to go into next. But the pool testing data from last week, I think we had 7 positive pools, as I recall. I think it was 7. And the week before, I think it was 12, and it's been 13. So that too is continuing to change in a positive direction. When I look back at the 20th of January, and we were over 40 active cases at that point, it feels really good to be at where we are today. So I just am hopeful that we're maybe have crested this recent wave, this recent peak. I wanted to fill you in on the conversation that's happening around the SOP and mitigation factors. You may have seen in the seen in the news recently that yeah.
So, Mr. Dover, you need to stay muted or we'll have to kick you out of the meeting. Go ahead and kick him out.
So in the national news, you are in the local news, you've probably seen Dr. Shaw and his briefings has discussed masking. And today there was I think a press release that came out, or perhaps it was Friday that came out, that indicated that superintendents were meeting with Dr. Shaw and the DOE just to discuss next steps with mitigation strategies. And in particular, right now, there's a lot of conversation around masking and where the future of masking and any changes that might be coming from state guidance around that. I think it follows that for, really since last summer, as we developed our guidance and our framework, we were asking for the state to just create what the pathway would look like. What are the benchmarks we're looking for, and how do we know when it's time to go down, this other fork in the road. And I think what people are really asking for now is that kind of guidance around masking. And Dr. Shaw, I think, was quick to say in a press conference that Maine doesn't have a mask mandate. I think almost without exception, superintendents would say that doesn't really feel like the case in Maine. It doesn't feel like we don't have a mask mandate because, the very strong recommendation is for universal masking. So I think to say we don't have a mask mandate doesn't really feel like our reality. So I think we're wanting to, ask the CDC to talk with, superintendents and school leadership about what does any change from where we are now look like, and what metrics would be appropriate to consider. And Dr. Shaw joined the table and listened to feedback, and I expect we'll hear more feedback from Dr. Shaw about this. But as we listen to the national news, and we know that the tide is changing as Omicron wanes, that there are districts who are beginning to talk about the reward versus the downside of kind of this ongoing mask framework we have. So I think that's something that I wanted to say is, on my mind as I'm listening to conversations in our region. And I do sit on the group that meets with Dr. Shaw. And so I'm listening to, people going around from around the state, and it's really pretty consistent that we all just really want to know what the path is. And in some communities, I think there is a lot of impatience right now and almost, demands that districts consider making this change. I don't feel that exactly in our community. I think there are people who are wanting us to consider this change. And I think there are those who are on the other end of the spectrum who would feel uncomfortable with such a change. That's truly been the case all along, right? That we've had the full spectrum. But I really hope that our public health experts in our state will give us some guidance around how to navigate next steps that we might take. And I guess time will tell as to whether or not we get that from the state. But I think that as we turn to spring, I'm really hopeful that we can take some steps with mitigation strategies that can hopefully provide more opportunities for everyone to have less restrictions on how we operate at school in a safe manner. So we'll see what's coming. And Karen and I have had some conversations around that. Karen to be here tonight in case you have any questions for her. And I think we're both just waiting to see what comes out from the state. And wanted to give you an opportunity tonight to ask any questions to us or have some conversation about this topic, because it's a growing topic of conversation in every meeting I attend these days with other districts.
I think it's important we start the conversation. I'm not looking to go cowboy and start setting our own standards. I'd much rather it come from the state. I have a little bit of skepticism about how much the state is going to own that decision. But at that point, I think I start to look around at the neighboring districts as, partial guidance. I don't have an opinion. And like I said, the one thing I don't want to do is start doing our own science and saying, here's the number and here's the place. But to me, when it's about two things, it's about severity. And at this point, it's abundantly clear Omicron is, I think it's fair to say, much less severe. Not that it's not severe, but it's much less severe about case numbers. And case numbers have seemed to be extremely seasonal. And so they're coming down. I could be wrong, but I kind of suspect they're going to keep coming down through June or July. And so at some point, I think we need to have a conversation where people are thinking about the fact that by the time school ends, I don't know when that happens. It's not next week, but it may not be June either. It's probably somewhere in between. We don't have masks in the schools, which for many kids would be a huge opportunity and a regain of social opportunities and other things. So again, I don't want to set standards by ourselves, and I don't want to go it alone. But I do think people should start thinking about the possibility that seems to be where the trend line is right now.
I would agree with that on all fronts. We're starting to see a number of states, and they're not states that you would normally think. There are states in the Northeast that are run under usually unified Democratic Party leadership that are moving in this direction, either eliminating, setting dates, late February, early March, end of March, for mask mandates in their schools. And those states do have a mandate. We do, but it's a de facto mandate rather than a jury mandate. But a number of those states are doing that. There's a growing impatience with the United States CDC after their kind of failure to make any kind of consideration for change on this. It led to some testy exchanges last week. I think we definitely need to start in this district having that kind of conversation. So I suspect you're right, Brian, that the numbers will continue going where they are going right now, and that's going to set us up, in my opinion, in a situation at some point before the end of the school year where we'll be able to safely remove masks. The mask requirement, anybody obviously would still be allowed to wear one if they wished, but remove the mask requirement in schools. So I think we need to start having the conversation now, so we're ready when we reach that point.
think we need to continue to do what we have been doing, which is look at what the situation is in front of us and adapt accordingly. And that's what we've been doing the whole time, whether it requires more precaution or less precaution or whatever the case may be, we've adapted well to what we've been presented, and I think we need to continue to do that. As I go out, I can't think of many other places in Maine besides schools that masks are required. You go to Target, you go to Walmart, you go out and about.
Schools and healthcare facilities,
Yeah.
I believe, are the only.
Yeah.
There might be still some private businesses that require it, but I think those are the only places mandatory.
So, I know I'm coming towards the end of my tenure on the board here, but I think it's kind of public knowledge. The reason I'm leaving is because I've got an increased family size and I've got an unvaccinated individual at home. And, I think that we just came off of a discussion about equity. And I think that we maybe keep that in mind when we're talking about medically vulnerable members of our community. And, you just made the point that there aren't many places besides schools and healthcare facilities that require masks in the state. Well, those are two places where people don't have a lot of choice about where they go. People go to healthcare facilities when they need healthcare services. And it's not like you can say, well, I'm going to go to the healthcare facility down the road because that's the one that requires masks. With schools, you can't say, well, I'm going to go to this private school today because they're still requiring masks. So when you're talking about children coming into an area where that's their only option, you really got to protect the community as a whole. And I think the attitude that people are tired of it and people are sick of it, that just personally, it makes me feel like you're saying people who are medically vulnerable don't matter to us. It's like an attack on the people who, this is a very serious thing for. There are a lot of people who are still not going out in public because they've got medical conditions. I go to extraordinary lengths in my business to make those people feel safe. But I've got people I know who only come and see me and stay at home. And so to say there are other places where you can go and we're the only place that still requires a mask, you could be talking about kids not going to school because you're not requiring masks here. And
Well,
I get really emotional about this because, this is just it's an attack on those families, is what it feels like to me.
Well, I think Mark's point was pretty clear that people who want to continue to wear masks can wear masks.
But that's not the point here because we're not talking, they don't make an N95 for pediatric face. There's not a NIOSH certified mask for a 6-year-old.
Why don't they?
It's not.
Because it's not really.
Because traditionally kids haven't had, because if a kid goes into a situation where you're talking about aerosolized infectious disease, they're going to be in an isolation ward in a hospital. So the way these masks are working, the style that you're wearing, it's not going to form a seal around your face, right? A surgical mask has been shown to be relatively poor protection against Omicron, right? So that's why we have the recommendation now for KN95 and N95 masks for Omicron. If you can't wear that as a kid, Nace Adams, you can't wear that as a middle schooler who doesn't have a face that fits into a 12 mask, then when your classmates are laughing and they're coughing and they're yelling and they're generating aerosols that aren't getting blocked out by their own mask, and that child who chooses to wear a mask, that family who chooses to send their child with a mask, doesn't really have an option that's available. It's going to provide adequate protection. Two-way masking is what works when you're talking about surgical style masks. The recommendation is still, if you are medically vulnerable and you are not in a situation with two-way masking, they say wear an N95, but also wear eye protection, right? Wear goggles because the eyes are another pathway of entry. So this is really serious stuff. And I think that I'm not opposed to considering carefully what the state recommends, but considering the fact that people are tired of this.
I didn't hear anybody say that.
So callous.
I didn't hear anybody here say that they were tired of this.
I heard that people were getting tired of wearing masks
I heard that people were.
Where did you hear that though? That wasn't said
We
here
can,
at
we
all.
can go back and, that's the sentiment I'm hearing.
But that wasn't said at all, all right? So if we're gonna say what's said, let's be honest about what was said. What everybody said was following the guidance that would come forward from the state. If the guidance changes, we would consider that. Nobody said anything about feeling tired. Nobody made any personal attacks. Nobody used any of the language that you were using. You are the only one using that language. Nobody else here was. So let's be clear. We can play back the tape. And you didn't say it. Nobody else here said it.
You want
other than you.
to stay here till 11 tonight, play back the tape
Sure,
of what
I
you
don't
said,
care.
Mark?
I know it's on the tape. The only one who's saying that stuff is you.
If we're talking about you
I
surrounding
just-
communities as a marker for what we do,
I just want
to
to
me,
stop
that is
back.
the worst. That's the worst way to approach it.
I think we're talking about state guidance from the CDC. We're talking about data on caseloads. That's what I've heard us talk about. We're talking about other states who've been rational actors. Those are the I've heard talked about. I just think it's, Patrick, you're absolutely right that it affects families who can't get vaccinated, who are immunocompromised and several other things. I have a parent who's immunocompromised and they have limited control over what their environment looks like. But it's also important to acknowledge that there's costs on the other side. There are kids who have social development challenges, who have had 2 years of setback on social development because they can't, right? They already are having a hard time reading faces when they can see the whole face and they can't see anything except the eyes right now. There are kids who have speech challenges because, again, they can't watch their teachers. You know, you can try these plastic masks and stuff, they don't work very well. There are issues on all sides of the fence here. And so not an easy thing. And I think this is why we're all saying we'd rather be following state guidance than going it alone. But there are challenges and costs in every direction we go. No decision we make is going to be comfortable and happy to 100% of the population. And I haven't heard anybody say anything other than following the state guidance as the state guidance tracks science. But I do think it's probably a proper, I don't know, note of caution just for people who have strong feelings on the side that you're expressing, to just start having a conversation to let them know that may or may not be the trajectory as we go forward. It's a deeply emotional issue, and I totally get where you're coming from. And as I say, I have a close relative who, is in that boat. But I also think it's the fallacy to paint it as there's no costs and people are just doing this because they're tired. There's costs, and you have to balance the science. We can never do 100% or absolute maximum effort prevention because that's just not how society works. So we're talking about tracking science, and we have to weigh all the balances and costs. But mostly we're tracking what the CDC says, and we're just trying to give people a heads up that I don't know where the CDC is going to go, but if you've been watching the tea leaves, it seems like there's something about to happen on this. So I just don't feel like it's honest to just, ignore like nothing's happening. And then all of a sudden the CDC guidance changes without any kind of a conversation or discussion. So that's all that's happening tonight.
I'd like an opportunity to talk.
Please.
So first, I do want to acknowledge, Patrick, I think any parent who doesn't have an unvaccinated child is experiencing the pandemic in ways that just other parents can't right now. Right. As someone who's like a parent of someone in the second to last group to get vaccinated, right? It just felt like forever. And for those, parents who have a kiddo under the 5 who wants to get their child vaccinated or wants to have that protection, I'm hearing that from friends, from colleagues, across the country here. So I think there's something that as a board, like that's part of this piece of the puzzle. And Patrick, just personally, I hear you, and I can understand, your frustration. The board knows I have a medical issue that's preventing me from meeting in person because of, my vulnerability to more severe complications of COVID. How I'm going to navigate life, I'm really still figuring out. But so that is an orientation I bring to this discussion. It's not the only orientation I bring to this discussion either, though. Way back when I first was on the board in the summer, I remember we were talking about off-ramping, which like I chuckle because it's like, gosh, things changed so quickly. To me, what I wonder, Meredith, is, and maybe it's too early, I can't see how vaccination rates aren't going to be part of off-ramping. And so I think that's a space as we've dealt with the recent spike, we haven't talked as much about, again, in terms of encouraging vaccinations. I think part of encouraging vaccinations is thinking about how do we get our most accurate data on vaccination statuses, including boosters for those who are eligible. And also, like, what are the range of reasons for hesitation to get children in the community vaccinated who attend RSU 26 schools, because I think, I know we're kind of having a conversation about like what might be coming, even though we don't know what the details are. But to me, like, so much of this comes back to vaccination status. And last time we saw rates, it's been a while. And again, I know that there's been questions around like how, accurate are these, because we don't require them, right? And we don't require people to share that information with us. But there is like, some grades are significantly lower than others. So, I think, is this a time to have that conversation about how do we, start to look at that more closely? And are there ways as a district that we can have these conversations with some families to better understand either whether it's hesitation, whether it's, flat out, no way is that going to happen, so that even we can understand like what may even be a realistic goal, or I don't even know if goal is the right word, but what's a realistic expectation that maybe the schools community might achieve.
Yeah, I haven't provided you the vaccination data in probably a couple of months at this point, and it really has been pretty stagnant, except we're getting, a trickle of information coming in at times. And we haven't been able to offer a clinic since we offered our last big clinics because PCHC had to pause their clinics. Karen's been working with them, trying to find out if we can get those, going again. And we're hopeful that we can, because I think that will help accomplish what you're asking for, is just, the opportunity for us to provide easy access for people who maybe have either just qualified for a booster, or maybe, some of our youngest students, maybe they've turned 5, some of our preschool kiddos. So we're working on those fronts, but I can certainly, update the vaccination data and give it to you. I think I've heard that comment a couple times in the past about us contacting families who we don't have record that their children are vaccinated and exploring why. I guess I'm not sure the value in that. I don't know. I think at this point, if people, and Karen talks to a lot of families, right? So I think Karen would have a really good handle on that, but I'm not sure I see the value relative to the effort that would take. But maybe Karen already has a good read on that. She can look over a list and, probably know a lot of the situations because of conversations she has with families and has had with families throughout, this year and last year.
I would not be comfortable with us, and hunting is the wrong word, but tracking down families who haven't vaccinated their kids yet, to ask them why. It's none of our business. I think at this point, everybody who wants to be vaccinated has had the opportunity to do so tenfold. And if they choose not to, it's not our position to hunt them down and ask them why and hound them over it. That's just my opinion.
I just want to clarify what I was kind of offering. So it's not at all about, I don't want to use the phrase because it's not hunting down. It's more just understanding. You know, and I'm kind of drawing back to the workshop we just had, right? Where it's like, we're trying to better understand people's experiences. And it's not even a judgment. It's just an understanding. And it's like, oh yeah, they just had COVID, you know, so we don't see, you know, them being vaccinated anytime soon. But I just feel like I don't know. And, you know, I don't mention this as like let's absolutely do this. You know, Jake, I study human learning and human motivations for a living. So I'm curious, and it's not, and I guess, you know, for me to think of it as curiosity and is a way of like, just to better understand, because there's going to be a point where we're going to be looking at this vaccination data and saying, wow, less than 50% of some of these grades, you know, at least according to the data we have, are not vaccinated. And we're going to have a conversation about removing masks. I just feel like that's a gap. And it's a little different to then be able to say like, yeah, okay, less than 50% are, but we have an understanding of X, Y, Z, contraindications, you know, rule out 10% of this particular, you know, grade. And another 15% is because 15% had COVID in the last 3 months, you know, and then what we're really looking at is like a different number than what the vaccination number is, at least, you know, on the data table we get. So yes, I have questions too, like, how would we go about this, if it's even possible to go about this, but I'm not like proposing this as a definitive idea, but as a way to help us figure out, is there any work we can be doing now to better understand the situation so that if masking guidance changes and there's a linkage to vaccination rates, we'll already have done some of our homework.
I have spoken to, can everyone hear me or?
Yes, Karen.
Like not on mute, okay. I speak to families every week and I think that, you know, it's a confidential thing. I can't really talk about it with names or anything, but there are many families in the community that have every week that continue getting vaccinated. So it's not something like we had that one big clinic at ASA where we did, I think, what did we do? 200 kids, I think we vaccinated. And, you know, and I kind of know the situations with certain families that aren't vaccinated. And I think that you would be surprised that there is still a lot of interest every week with people deciding to get vaccinated, or there are reasons that they can't get vaccinated, or there is progress being made in that direction. And there's a lot of opportunity out there if people want it.
Yeah, I think about the families that do want to get vaccinated but haven't yet, right? So what are
They reach out
ways-
to me and ask, and
Yeah.
I've given, you know, and I tell them, I send them in directions where they can go.
Mhm.
And some people are taking advantage of that.
Right. And so then
But
there's
still-
that piece of like the people who don't. Yeah.
What's that?
I think the main barrier that I see people have to accessing vaccinations for their children right now is if they don't review communications from us, right?
Yes.
You know, we had students who would show up without their paperwork. So we get on the phone and we do paperwork over the phone. It's not like they don't have paperwork and we turn them away. So, you know, it's mainly if there are families who just don't read their emails from us, who
Mhm.
don't know if things are available. And you know, even if that's the case, I mean, Karen and the principals have talked to a lot of families over the past year. And, you know, have done a lot of, sometimes, you know, sharing of information at times with families who, you know, maybe fall into that category, who just aren't tuned in to all the emails. So I guess I mean, maybe, you know, I don't know what I don't know here. But maybe so is your question less about understanding if there's vaccine hesitancy, what's playing into that, and more about, do we have people over there who are having trouble getting access to vaccines?
I don't get that feeling at all. Sometimes, you know, a lot of people ask me, well, how should I go about this? Are you going to have another clinic? And I say, no, right now the school clinics are on hold pretty much. But they are going to start them again, but I send them in directions. They can go to Shaw's, they can go to, you know, several places to get vaccinated. And usually people, if I tell them, they're like, oh, okay, you know, and I tell them how to get access. And then there are people that are just not interested, and you can't, you know, I feel like it just pushes them away more. The more, if I suggest, well, you know, if I say, well, you know, they should be vaccinated or whatever, I feel like that's, to me, that's still a personal choice. You can do education with them and tell them the advantages and lead them in the right direction, but there are some people, you know, and you can't, I just try and stay neutral with the situation because it doesn't do any good to push them. And I feel like I think we're definitely over 50% of ASA that are vaccinated. And we've had so many cases of Omicron. So that will offer some you know, some protection too. But it is a delicate topic with many families that now we're getting down to families that haven't chosen it yet. So, you know, you have to be careful how you approach it with them.
There is research out there, both the national level in the US and research coming out of other countries too, that's looking at the question that Beth wants answered here, which is if you have not been vaccinated yet, what explains that fact? And for a very small percentage of those people, according to those studies, it's lack of access, right? But that's a very small number.
Yeah, because
I don't think that's much. There's another larger than that percentage, but still relatively small, of those people who are interested in getting vaccinated, but they have concerns, particularly about the mRNA vaccine, and they're waiting for something like the Novavax vaccine to get approved, which is built on a decades-old model that they trust, right? Like, for example, there's a massive waiting list in Germany where Novavax has actually been approved. It hasn't been approved yet here. People want that vaccine. They don't have enough of it yet. That's small, right? The overwhelming, and then there's also, and this is probably relevant at ASA, there's a number of parents of younger kids who are still a little bit concerned that they're interested, but they're not 100% sure that it's safe, and so they're waiting. They're like, I don't want to be in that first 6 months. I'll wait, and if a year out, there hasn't been any we'll go. But the biggest number of people who are eligible to be vaccinated, who have not been vaccinated, are unvaccinated, and because it's a personal choice. And they're not hesitant, they are no. And there is nothing that is going to be said or done to move. It has become an inherently political and ideological issue that matches up the divisions in the rest of the country, and you're not moving. Right? So, I mean, that's the question's been answered. It hasn't been answered at RSU 26 level, but it's been answered at the national level, and it's been answered in other countries. So I get that from a purely intellectual exercise, yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, you know, if you're a social scientist, it's an interesting question, but we know the answer, at least at the national level, and there's no reason to suspect that we're indifferent here, right? So, I mean, interesting intellectually, not terribly interesting in a practical sense, or useful in a practical sense, because we're not going to do anything about it.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
I mean, I think the proactive approach, especially, this is one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation tonight, is people who are sitting there on the fence, thinking about the fact that maybe not, but maybe there won't be masks 2 months from now. If that's what pushes them over the fence. I really like the proactive approach of trying to, see if we can get PCHC to come back and give a clinic again, especially, with that kind of information starting to get out there. But yeah, like Mark elaborated, unfortunately, this just got calcified along various lines that previous public health decisions have not necessarily been calcified to the same degree. So yeah, unfortunately, finite ability to change the number of vaccinations. The proper public health approach is just keep chipping away. And so let's offer that clinic and let's see if we can get a few more.
So then I'm going to say something kind of brash, but I'm just going to say it. So then as a board, we would be okay with putting families and the kids at risk because we know there's a significant proportion of the population not vaccinated in our schools by removing masks. Like to me, then it's like, Mark, you said like it's not useful to engage in this exercise, but there's an ethical component here that I think we at the very least have to have a conversation about. So regardless of anyone's vaccination status, I don't want to put kids and families at risk.
So I hear that, and I completely agree. We have an obligation, whatever I may think about vaccines and what other people should do about vaccines, we as a board need to consider our entire school population. I agree with that. I think the thing I'm having a hard time with is we're praising this as any risk is immoral. And that's just not how public health works. That's not how decisions around flu or the smallpox or, that's not how decisions get made. Every public health decision is a cost-benefit trade-off. And it's very easy to take a position of phrasing it as if we put one kid at risk, that's not okay. But, and on one level, I don't want to put any kid at risk. But as a national public health discussion and as a district public health discussion, we're talking about costs and benefits. And the costs have come down a lot compared to where they were 2 years ago. The benefits of preventative measures. I'm not sure how to phrase this in a cost benefit framework. But
Financial costs.
Yeah, the health costs of COVID has come down quite a bit. Some of that's about vaccines, some of that's about people who already got sick, a lot of that's about Omicron emerging. Some of that's about seasonality and the fact that we're heading out of the winter instead of into winter. But the costs have come down a lot, and so the conversation needs to be recalibrated on a cost-benefit basis. And it just feels a little glib to me to say if there's any risk, we have to do everything we can. I mean, we're not doing that. If we were doing everything we can, we'd shut the schools down again. Everything's a cost-benefit discussion.
I know we tend to correct each other's words a lot, and I don't usually do that, but I think just raising the point, it's an ethical, like science can't answer all of our questions. We use science, we apply science, but science in and of itself does not give us answers, which is why we even get to have this conversation, right? Because it's the application of science and it's the ways in which, all of our different identities make sense of the science. So I do think it's important to raise the ethical component. And by raising the ethical component, I'm not saying something is amoral or moral, but I'm saying there is an ethical question here. And because there is an ethical question, we all have a different way of orienting to it. And I think, that's okay, but I think it's important to consider that. And I say this as a science educator, researcher, as well as a scientist, specifically trained scientist who worked in public health. So I often hear this language of like, science is going to fix everything. it's actually the people who use the science in whatever ways we do. And there are significant ethical questions. And I think it's important that what we're doing here is we're laying them out. And, you know, Brian, your cost benefit analysis is not everybody else's cost benefit analysis, but we're trying to reach consensus, you know, and I appreciate that. And that's the hard work of this board. And it's been the hard work of this board before I was on it this summer. You know, and I include you, Meredith, in that too. So, but I want to be clear, I'm not saying it's amoral to do that, but I am saying there is an ethical component to all of this. So that's what I was saying.
But I don't want to get in, you know, big distraction. The only thing I would say is there's ethical components in multiple directions, right? And so anytime we simplify it to saying all of the ethics points in one direction, I think that's, anyway, there's ethics, there's a lot of ethical considerations in a lot of directions. So, you know, and I mentioned some of them earlier. There's kids who, I'm not such a person, my kids are not such people, but there are kids who have really suffered under masks too. There's ethical considerations in all directions.
Have we undertaken any sort of review to, you know, tally or quantify or put together a report of, and I know that early on we heard from one or two parents who felt like their kids were burned by masks. We did hear from those folks, I remember last year. But do we have a feeling of who those kids are in our schools? And then also what mitigation or strategies we've taken to address those concerns? Because honestly, if we're talking about infectious disease and we're talking about children with special needs, if we are able to provide services for children with special needs in a way that doesn't change disease transmission for the entire school district, then that would be an important component of how to look at things. You know, I mean, if you've got 10 kids that are really suffering with masks in the whole school district, is there something we can do for those 10 kids that doesn't increase the risk for everybody else in the school district? And those are the kinds of questions I'd like to see us asking instead of just talking about, well, we need an off-ramp for masks. I don't actually believe that. I don't believe we need an off-ramp for masks as long as we're still in a high transmission zone. You know, yes, maybe if we were down in that gosh, it was like a year ago, but if we were down in that lowest level of transmission, I wouldn't be talking about this when we're nowhere near that. In fact, caseloads are so high that they even said, boy, we don't even think caseloads are a good measure anymore because it's meaningless to talk about it because people are underreporting it so much. They didn't say caseloads aren't important because people getting infected don't matter. They said caseloads aren't an accurate measure of disease because it's underreported so much. That's why the emphasis is shifted away from talking about cases. So, you know, I really like to see more about, do we have children suffering and what have we done to address that before we start talking about using those children as a reason to increase the risk for infectious disease for an entire school district.
So here's my proposal. We don't have a decision before us tonight. We've all, I think, expressed our opinion. Let's give Patrick the last word and move on to the budget. Is that okay with everybody? We've got a long meeting tonight. Okay, budget.
Documents in the folder that we provided. These are the standard format that we typically use. So we have the document that's the one-page overview of revenue at the top, expenditures at the bottom, and then you have a couple of detail pages. That there's one more detailed page about revenues and one more detailed page about expenditures. So, you know, these are the documents that we start with and really continue to refine throughout the budget process. So I just want to start on our overview page to begin with. And this is last meeting I gave kind of an overview of what we were seeing as big impact areas. And so now we've rolled it all together for you to give you this first look at the whole picture. And I'm going to rely on the team here. Lynn is here with us tonight. Most members of the admin team are here with us to be able to answer questions if we have them, and provide more nuanced explanations if there are those questions. So on the revenue side, I think, we talked about last time that we saw an increase in our state subsidy. You can see that on that line 1 under revenue. Our state subsidy increase was almost $350,000, which is really a strong increase in a given year. In addition, the local allocation required for Orono to contribute is $64,000. That for us, we always have an amount above the local required allocation that we push out to taxpayers to help fund education in Orono. So we really manage the other side of that. What additional do we have need for from our local taxes? But that's an important figure around mill rates and how the burden for locally funding the state formula is direct. The next few lines are about tuition, and tuition this year, we're projecting that our regular tuition is going to be stable. We have a small group of seniors graduating, and we're anticipating a smaller than normal freshman class, or on the smaller side for what we typically have for a freshman class. And so Lynn has calculated, based on examination of all the data, pretty much an even number out and an even number coming in. With special ed, we saw this year that we didn't achieve what was expected for tuition revenue from special ed. So this reduction that you see is not necessarily reflective of a change in numbers. It's just a change in kind of actually what we're seeing this year in terms of recoverable tuition around these students. The next few lines are not really anything we have control over. They're built into bond formulas. Yeah.
Go back on that. Is that decrease in what we thought for special ed is because we had to turn to more outside placements than we anticipated, or just fewer students? Or both?
Lynn, can you answer that?
I think it's fewer students. That's a number that I work closely with special ed on. So I don't have necessarily all the details of that, but I think that it is a decrease in the number of students that we were thinking we were going to bill for in as far as special education tuition. And the next year really is a catch up from this year. We think that looking at our seniors this year, we will replace them in the special ed realm. But I think what happened maybe is we didn't replace as many this coming year as we lost, if that makes sense.
Right.
Thank you.
Lisa, would you add anything to that explanation?
No, I'd say she's exactly right, that we had more leave. We also had a student from at the end of the year that joined us from another district that was an outside placement. But definitely we replaced fewer that left. So yeah, it was definitely a change in numbers.
Thank you.
If you go down to line 12 and 13, that's where I want to provide a little more explanation. So typically we have, line 12 is a new line. I wanted to break out the strategy that we indicated last year we wanted to use for laptop purchases, in that we decided that we wanted to utilize some of our unassigned to buy this capital expense over time. when we had that larger than normal carry forward amount, that was one of our strategies for using that. So this is a reflection of if we carried that strategy forward as intended, we would need to pull in on line 12. You see there 205,000 from unassigned to pay the multi payment for this year. When we get to the expenses, you'll see that that's reflective of purchasing some more units, and that's all included. That's wrapping in the multi-year payment for what we bought for this current year, plus a projection of what we hope to buy next year, for next year. And then line 13, we reduced back down because we pulled what we had in there for laptops up to that line above it. So we had, I think it's 134,000 or so in line 13 this current year for laptops, in addition to the 816,000. So now we've just separated it out so that it's a little more clear as to what we're doing with laptops, separate from how we're using the balance forward line. And then the additional local really is what's required to balance all of the revenues above against the expenditures that we have outlined in our proposed preliminary budget. So you can see that you know, if you just go down to the bottom green line, the green line is showing an increase in expenditures in this budget of 1,161,466. But when you go up and compare that against the bottom line under the revenue of increase, decrease, the increase in taxes with this budget and revenue picture would be 858,000, because we do have that increased revenue coming in this year. So, you know, that's the summary picture. And when Lynn and I started looking at kind of the total of revenues and expenditures, you know, my most recent memory of our budget work was last year, when this number at this point in budget process looked very different. And so we looked back over time, and what we actually found, and I can't remember if I said this last week, I don't think I did, our last meeting, was that really about every other year, this is where we find ourselves to begin with. So this is not an unusual place for us to start. It's just unusual compared to last year. And so, you know, I think that we often find ourselves in this position. And I think one of the things that we asked staff to do this year is to build the budget that you feel like we need, that build in requests as you see need for them. Whereas last year we said, we're anticipating that we might have a curtailment or a drop in subsidy. So build your budgets with that in mind. So those were the kind of two differences in frames. And this year is the typical frame that we give people. And then we do the work of sometimes paring down our budget to manage our, you know, local tax increase. So I think we're in a more normal place this year. You know, no shortage of challenges in front of us, though, in terms of decision making around this proposed budget. So if you don't have any questions about this page, I think the expenditures are probably where we need to spend more time kind of talking through. Okay. Well, one more thing about this first page. Brian, I think last meeting, Brian and I were having this sidebar, and we, after the meeting, kind of compared notes, and Lynn and I looked at this too. Last year, when we went to the annual meeting and then had the vote, we had, you know, our budget set, and it's different than what you see here. What you see here is what actually happened when we got the increased subsidy later in June, and then in July we're able to apply an additional 302,000 in tax, you know, tax reductions to foreigner taxpayers. So the change that Brian was thinking of last meeting is really reflective of what happened after the budget was set last year. So last year, you know, we had a decision. You could either apply that increased subsidy that we weren't sure what we were going to get, but you decided if we got any increased subsidy, it would go to tax reduction. And we did that to the tune of $302,000. If we had not have done that last year and just, you know, save that maybe to apply to this year's budget, the difference in that increase decrease would be $556,000 now. So, you know, that's something I think important to note that, you know, we reduced taxes last year, which was great. I think this year it causes us to have some pain, right? Of deciding how to, you know, can we sustain that kind of tax reduction that we were able to offer last year when we had that extra subsidy at the end. So those are just some figures that I found interesting and noteworthy around comparing the budgets. If we look at the expenditure page, it's the one that's landscape or no portrait and has the cost centers down the left-hand side. So the way we structure this is over to the right under comments, we kind of try to list out the most notable changes or differences, pluses or minuses in the budget that's been proposed. And we do that kind of by comparison to this year's budget. So first, I want to draw your attention to the very bottom. So one thing we don't break out by cost center is the contractual salary benefit increases that really flow across a lot of different cost centers. So we've summarized those at the very bottom. So across all cost centers, not including positions that are being added or removed, the salary and benefit that we are, you know, contractually obligated to is an additional $327,000. When you compare that to last year and where we were last year with that, we gave some pretty aggressive salary increases in our contracts. We were at just under 200,000, I think around 190,000 last year in our salary and benefit contractual, you know, obligated salary increases. And, you know, I think this board committed that they really wanted to try to make some headway on set salaries in this district and has done great work, but, you know, it represents a significant annual obligation for the district that is important to note on this page.
Those obligations we made were in areas where we were significantly behind, you know, some of our area districts, right? We were very strategic in those areas where we tried to do those, and you know, a lot of the thanks on that goes to Meredith and Jake and the work they did on those contract negotiations. But
I would add significantly behind area districts, those things have evolved significantly behind industry too.
yes,
Places where we're having trouble hiring because we were just not paying what anybody else around here was paying.
we recognized there were certain groups among our community that needed to be addressed, and we did that in negotiations.
The other area that typically this time of year, we're always just projecting health insurance increase. We built in 9%. Last year was the first year since I've been here that we had a 0% increase. The year before that, though, we were really high. So
Have we
it's
gotten our
hard.
max yet?
I'm sorry.
Have we gotten the max
No,
yet?
we haven't. We, I think, get the max by, I know we get the actual rate in late March this year, but the max usually comes a couple weeks before that. But that 9% reflects $156,000 of potential increase there, and that's what we built into this budget. So, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we had 0% again? But, you know, I mean, when Brian and I were talking about this, he made a really good point. I mean, inflation is hitting us in a lot of places in this budget, and that, I don't know what to expect around how that might influence insurance rates this year. And then dental insurance is a little lower than we've built in some years, but we feel really comfortable with that 3%. And we typically don't change the budget after that because it's a pretty nominal change and we get it quite late. So that's probably what we'll stick in the budget.
And I'm assuming that that figure that's listed there for decreased facility rental is no longer accurate if we do in fact keep that portable.
It would be basically an offset. Yeah, we'd have to add that back in because that was actually not for the portable. That was for using some UMaine and using the core facilities.
So essentially that's going
It
to
would be a wash.
zero.
Yeah. So in regular ed, you can see some changes there. We have just one area where we're anticipating some savings. We see that there's a typo, sorry about that. Plan on changing the course position to a 0.5 position based on just the course demand there. We feel like that's right sizing that. We have a retirement happening there, and so it's really the time to examine that and make that change. We're requesting consideration for the ASA art position to go to full-time. We had it full-time last year due to COVID. We have it back to a 0.7 this year. We feel like that can add some schedule flexibility and also provide some additional services potentially to students. You see AP course training. We feel like we're behind in AP course training. We really need to catch up. So this is an increased item specifically for trying to catch up on some AP training for some of our instructors. Supply lines, a couple of things are playing into that. Some is projected cost increases that just inflation, people are seeing costs are going up. But also, I think people pulled back last year and we got a lot of state, our relief money, and people last year in their budgeting, or for this year really tried to, tighten the belt and do without some things. And so we're playing some catch up now to kind of get things back to a level that people need for programming. High school math books, we need to continue or complete the purchase of high school math books. I mentioned that last week. That's Algebra 2 and Geometry books. We've already purchased Algebra 1 books. And then Milty, I mentioned, I think last week that we want to now roll down to 6th grade laptops because we can get state subsidy for those. And we're projecting a slightly larger need for our freshman class than we have graduating next year. And so, that's something that we feel like we have 78, I think, graduating. We may, I would be surprised if we're down at 78 in our freshman class. We feel like we need to be prepared to go up to 90 laptops. And so we'll wait and see where our enrollment comes in before we finalize the purchase on that. So we're projecting that now. So those are really the biggest impacts that we saw overall in this cost center. You can see the increase from one year to the next there. And special ed, let's move on to special ed if you have any questions there. And if you have anything to add, Lynn, or any of the other leadership staff who put this together, please let me know. In special education, you can see there, we talked a little bit last week about some changes in staffing. The ed tech is really is one that we've moved around in different, we've had to shift a lot of staff this year. And I think with just some staffing changes, we feel like there's one with some student needs that are changing as we look at next year. We can reduce one ed tech and special ed. SLP, there's really an in and out happening here. You see we're removing a teacher, but we're going to contracted services instead and adding, I misspoke last week, it's 0.4 additional of a person for SLP time. So we're shifting some of that over into local entitlement also, but what's in the budget stays pretty consistent there. Out of district placement, that cost is going up. And I think we've built in one flex spot for us. And we sometimes have done two, sometimes we've done one. but it feels really important for us to have one flex spot. So we feel that's an important number to keep in the budget. We've talked at several junctures this year about social work and the caseloads of our social work services really filling up this year. We want to consider adding, we have a half-time position now, see if we can make that position full-time to expand services. That would be the cost associated with that. In special education, you know, Lisa's report tonight showed student numbers. And, you know, I think one of the things we're seeing is the level of need that we're seeing is really growing. I mean, our numbers, our residency numbers, I think, have increased. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Our rate of identification and evaluation is increasing, and the services that students need are really stretching our current service providers, you know, time that we have budgeted for them, stretching that really beyond what we have in our budget. And so Lisa's anticipating a need for more OT services. And then we have an ed tech that's contracted that is for an out-of-district placement that we have to provide. So that's why it's contracted. And then supply lines, Lisa's doing some shifting around of local entitlement. And so one of the, you know, kind of collateral costs of shifting some like SLP costs into local entitlement is bringing in some supply costs into the budget. So there's a little bit of in and out happening with that particular piece, but it's more advantageous for us to put contracted service costs in local entitlement. So that's one of the reasons she's doing that. And when you look at the rate of special ed increase, we've noted this several years. You know, I know it kind of makes you scratch your head when we say that, you know, we're going down 99,000 in tuition student revenue. But some of this is depending on, you know, where the students reside and the level of need. And, you know, I'm pleased to say that I feel like we're serving some students here that we're becoming more and more equipped to be able to serve, so we can not have to pay for out-of-district placements and keep students in a regular education environment, which is the goal. But it does come at a cost to, you know, have to provide services here as opposed to sending a student to another center school. So special education, you know, that's a big number there in that increase. I think there may be some, you know, we'll have to have some conversation around all of this, certainly. As I go down through the list, I mean, the number of places where I'm talking about staff changes is significant. It's not typical for us. So I think that's something that we may be already noting and that we need to have a conversation about. Ready to go to other instruction? I think, you know, I talked about some of this last week. I think in this area, one of the things that I can't remember if I mentioned, the scoreboards, and there's just some, you know, equipment purchases. And one of the things that we might consider as an option is whether or not we want to divert any of those to, you know, the athletic proceeds, the gate receipts, the athletic checkbooks, what we call it. Because I think that this is a lot in 1 year to hit the budget, and so we might want to consider that as one strategy for scoreboard replacement. I mean, I saw a picture that Steve posted on Facebook of our middle school scoreboard in the gym, and it's showing its age for sure, and it's becoming, I think, harder and harder to
So the last time we needed something for it, was very difficult to find
Yeah.
parts, although eventually we did turn, I think, something up, but it was hard. to
Yeah.
find it.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten really good use of that. I think the question is, you know, strategy around how to address the need and whether or not we need all three in 1 year are two questions that we could talk about. Similarly with the padded seats. I think, you know, some other things there are requests the lunch duty, I think helps. One thing that we've experienced now is we used to have benefit of Ed helping cover lunches, and that's not something that we can count on. The town has said, just with the new structure of our SRO and Ed's time as well, that we really can't rely on that as a way to cover lunch. And so with Mike going back into his full-time assignment, I think, you know, as a backup, we really need to have what the middle school has and have a, you know, a duty assignment there that's a stipended position to augment administrative coverage of lunch duty. And then under music, our official costs, those are just, you know, rates really are increasing. Demand is difficult. Our supply is difficult, and there's also some, you know, just increased costs there with the rate of officials. And then that last item, there's a number of things going into that with the new facility and some set design that they want to be able to do in the auditorium. Lumber costs were cited as one of the things happening there, or just material cost prices going up for some of the set pieces, and costume kind of supply is waning, or pieces are getting worn out that need some replacement. And additionally, the rate for musicians is getting harder also to be able to, you know, get people to agree to work for the rates we're providing. There's also part of that a desire for live musicians, which is more time than recorded musicians. And so those are several things playing into that request increase. Under student and staff.
Oh, can I ask one question?
Yeah, sure.
The fourth line down, what is a portaphone?
It's a piece of equipment that's used on the field to communicate with the press box.
Okay.
We didn't have a headset this year. Ours no longer functioned, and we were fortunate that WA let us use theirs because they didn't have their football team this year, but ours was no longer functioning.
Any other questions? Under student and staff support, one of the things that I mentioned last week was the tech assistant role and our desire to pull that into our budget. It's been paid for with relief money last year. This year, this current year, we pulled in the nurse assistant position into the budget, and I feel like the tech assistant's really the next position that's really something that's difficult to walk back. I just don't see how we can not have that kind of tech capacity in the district at this point, with the number of assets that we grew in the last 2 years and the level of use that's just expanded. I mean, it's been one of the good outcomes of the pandemic, right? That we've utilized so many more kind of innovative and engaging tech applications, but it does require support. And so we're recommending to bring this in to the budget. The next two are lines that we're requesting to put in the budget to help support the ongoing equity work that we want to establish this spring and then continue into next year. So to have some funds to help support you know, committee work and moving those initiatives forward would be in the form of those payments to committee members. Contracted services, that's a variety of applications. I don't have my notes in front of me, so if you have a question, Lynn can look into details, but you know, that's the line that pays for our some of our contracts, like our access controls that on the doors now, the software that runs that's a new cost that's coming into the budget. We have some other software that runs some of the display units we have. That's a new cost that's coming into the budget. Len, is there another big new thing that was, I think our Zoom license also came in here. Some of those license pieces that have been previously covered, you know, with some relief money that we have to now pull those into the budget. And then assessment costs, as we have kind of transitioned over to the state subsidizing NOEA and our MAP assessment, and we piloted a the MAP, what was it called? MAP Accelerator? Is that what it was called, Meredith? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And that's not something that we have chosen to continue with, so we're taking that out. And I think also the science assessment pieces were reduced here as well, so that's why the reduction. Under system administration, we built in the cost for the equity audit this year, so we're able to reduce that out since that work is wrapping up this spring. And then one of the things that we're proposing to add is adding back that position that's going to help with accounts payable. We talked about in the audit that, you know, some of the support that we were having from high school increased capacity is no longer available. And when we eliminated that position, that was the solution to be able to keep up with the workload and the requirements that have to be met in that office. So as our, you know, discussion that followed our audit, we have to support that need. And I don't think we can, you know, squeeze any more out of the productivity happening there. So we're just going to have some additional support hours to complete the work there. In school administration, we talked last week a little bit about the proposal for assistant principal for ASA, and over the years, the increasing workload of, you know, expanding staff, expanding students. We're up at ASA, you know, the highest enrollment figure in a number of years, and you know, the program has needs beyond really what it's reasonable to think one person can do and sustain. And the reality is, a lot of people the last 2 years and more than that, you know, are pulled in to try to cover different aspects of the role that is just not feasible for one person to do. One of the things that just become unwieldy, though, that other people in the building really can't do is evaluation, supervision evaluation. And so that's a piece that really is needing additional support, and also just, you know, student behavior intervention and student, you know, serving student needs that pulled a lot of different directions. And, you know, when there's a student need in crisis or something has to be dealt with, you know, and the principal has an evaluation happening over here, it's just like that all day at ASA. And so I've heard it now from 3 principals since I've been here, and I think it's time we problem solve how we can address this issue, because the enrollment's not shrinking. If the enrollment was shrinking, that would be a different discussion, I think, or I don't think we'd be having a conversation. So, but it comes at, you know, there's a cost with that, as with anything, and you know, we're working on kind of developing a job description of the kinds of things we imagine this person to be doing. But some of this will depend on the applicant pool and ultimately how we design a position around the person that looks like they're the best fit. So I think, you know, I'm going to work to design a flexible job description that we can tailor around, kind of like we've done with the co-principals at the high school. I mean, we've tailored that job description around people's strengths and what they really can bring to the position with, you know, their experience and skill set. So I think that's what we would also do in the principal position.
Meredith, can I ask a clarifying question. Just to be super clear, so the way you're talking about it, it would be a standalone position, not something that would kind of be maybe someone who's currently there, half-time teaching, half-time assistant principal, but like a standalone assistant principal at 0.5 at halftime.
Someone who's currently there,
Okay,
that, you know, if they apply for this position and they're the best fit, then whatever else they're doing, we find someone else to do that other half of what they are doing in that role. You know, I'm not going to predispose it to say, well, it's going to be connected with this one position, because I think we have to wait for the applicant pool. But I certainly think we should be open to imagining that that might be the best way forward with this.
Yeah.
But it will depend on who's available. I've been looking around at where this is happening around the state. I think I found 5 or 6 places where it's happening. I'm still in the process of contacting them all. The first few I've reached out to, they have it connected to another position that's usually in like coaching or instructional support in some way. But I think it's probably dependent on, you know, what applicant pool emerges. And I mean, it could also be just someone who works half-time, who is not at the school full-time. So it could go either way.
okay, thanks. Yeah, I think just missing the conversation last week when it was first mentioned. Thank you for the extra info.
It was really just kind of an overview, so good question. The high school admin changes, that's really just reflecting in the budget this year. The co-principal model, last year we had a dean of students, and so you know, to have 2 principals paid at a principal level, there is a slight increased cost to that, and that's what is reflected here in the budget. Under total transportation, you know, here's where we start to talk about inflation costs. Just the fuel projected increase of $27,000. You know, I don't know if this is going to be sufficient actually with prices. I mean, we've tried to, you know, leave ourselves a little bit of room, but really we're not leaving ourselves much room from where we are now with these projections, or what's projecting right now. So that's the first place that hits us. Everything else there, well, I think sped transportation I mentioned last week is a contractual, just in our contract this year, it goes up a little bit each year, the mileage rate. And then the last one is special ed transportation, or no, in the middle is special ed transportation. Facilities maintenance. We talked last week about the custodial needs at the high school and the square footage increase with the auditorium complex, which includes 3, you know, new classrooms, and then the 4 classrooms at the end. That's a lot of new square footage on, you know, a building that was already kind of a big building to have 2 evening custodians. I think we've certainly made it work with 2 evening custodians over the years, but I just don't see how we make it work with that increased square footage. And, you know, similarly, the auditorium space, we've done a lot of talking, started in stipend committee around looking at different models for how people are managing auditorium spaces. Because one thing what we've learned through that is that, you know, it's this kind of investment is shown to be important to protect the investment in the space. There's a lot of pretty technical equipment and a lot of moving parts to the auditorium space, not to mention scheduling and supervision and training around use. And when we have looked at lots of different models, we just feel like it needs to be a position where someone's going to be paid like we imagine this to be on the ESP scale. And Shauna and I've been looking for job descriptions We're imagining it to be something like the tech assistant kind of expertise level and pay level, because this person's going to have some technical expertise around a lot of the sound equipment, the lighting equipment, be able to maintain that equipment and train others in use of that equipment. And then also just the scheduling and supervision of use. So we're right now have calculated this based on 20 hours a week over the school year, plus some summertime, but not all summer. So it's like some flex time summer. We built it like we do our admin assistants too, that have, is it 10 or 20 days in the summer, Lynn? I think we built it as,
It's usually 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after.
it's the
So
20
that
days.
would be 20 days, yeah.
So we built this the same way. Depending on summer use, I mean, right now we're just projecting about summer use. We don't know, but when we looked at, Cammie put together a sheet for the stipend committee to look at, and just the projected number of hours and days that we're thinking of right now is pretty astounding. I mean, it's going to be fantastic that we have the space now for all of this programming that we haven't already, knowing that this space is going to be used for it. But it's going to take someone to make sure that the space is used in a way that preserves it for a lot of years. And so that's the best structure that we feel like should be put in place initially. I think it's going to be something we're going to learn the first year, though, what we don't know now, and we're going to have to look at that moving forward. In an ideal world, I would love for whoever is our chorus person to also be a great auditorium manager, but I don't know that that's going to be the people walking through our door, right? So it may or may not, again, be connected to another position in this district. It just depends on the applicant pool and who we get and who's the right fit, because this is, not everyone has this particular skill set. So, so that's another, additional position. The next two are, squarely energy increase projections. Electricity costs, we're already, seeing some of that in our power bills. And this is somewhat a projection of the consumption of new spaces, but also a projected increase of 30%, which is what we're being told to expect for our energy bills, our electricity bills. And then natural gas, there's a projected increase there as well. Property insurance, I mentioned that last week. I mentioned the abatement and repair lines last week. The maintenance of supplies, that's an area where I mentioned last week the filters, the air filters that we're bringing into the budget. Also, there are bike racks, and that's something that we may talk about. The custodial equipment, those are some equipment pieces to increase efficiency. And I think one of them is a standing floor machine. The other is simply, we need some equipment in these new spaces. Like, we have to have the cleaning equipment down in the auditorium that's appropriate for that space. The maintenance truck is another line. I talked about that last week with, my kind of realization when we were hiring a new maintenance director of what if this person doesn't have a truck? We're not going to have a maintenance truck. And I didn't think that was really the place we needed to be as a district. We talked about this a number of years ago, the idea of this truck, and here we are again, and I think we need to talk about it and determine, where we're going as a district around this. As Mark pointed out, that decrease in facility rental lines may be kind of offset if we do move forward with recommending keeping the one portable. And then under debt service, that's just the scheduled kind of change in debt service for the coming year. I've been talking a lot.
And that
So-
debt service, that's the peak, right? It goes down next year, or is there one more
It
year?
goes down and there's one more peak. It goes down after this next year and there's one more peak, I think, when we do our final finance, but it doesn't go above this at that point. So questions, or Lynn and others hopefully can add more details if you have questions.
I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this.
Thank you. A lot of people's faces you see on the screen have done a lot of work, and also admin assistants and staff to pull all this data together. So kudos to all of those folks.
I mean, I would second the appreciation of the work that goes into this. Just some really broad brush comments to contextualize things. That 1.16 million increase in expenses is about a 7.5% increase, which sounds like a lot. But the two baselines are inflation and student enrollments, and student enrollments up 2.5%, and inflation was 7% last year. So, you know, in that context, you could argue you would expect the baseline of a 9.5% increase. And I'm not saying I'm happy with 1.16 million. I think we've got to get that number down, because that $800,000 number is too big. But it's not quite as jaw-dropping as it sounds like at first blush. You know, the student enrollment is really healthily increasing, and the inflation is hitting every budget in the country right now. Of course, it's hitting our taxpayer budgets too. I just want to put the taxes in a little bit of context. So 3 years ago, in 2019, we presented a 0% tax rate increase budget, and the voters approved the bond, which we told people would add a 1.96 mil increase. We managed to cut that down to 1.2 mil in the year following. So, you know, we sold it and was voted on 1.96, and we cut so many corners in other places, it was only 1.2. Last year, before the state revenues came in, we were looking at $130,000 tax cut increase, that's about a third of a mil. And then the state additional state revenues came in, and that was another 300,000, almost 2/3. So last year, we cut taxes by almost a full mil. I'm using the old pre-revaluation mills, because I don't even know what the new valuation number is, and nobody's brain is wrapped around that yet. But you know, so zero budget, up 1.2 mil in the context of, you know, $16 million bond and massive construction project. So 0% increase, 1.2 mil increase in the context of a large construction project, a 1 mil decrease last year. So I just think it's really important to get those numbers out. It kind of dropped my jaw when I heard candidates night, when two people running for the town assumed that the big increase last year was from the schools. It was not. We actually had a 1 mil tax cut, and here people were saying we had a $1.6 million increase in taxes last year. So I don't know, somebody's got a good PR machine out there. It's not us. But if anybody wants to know the real numbers, those are the real numbers. 2019, 0%, zero change to taxes. 2020, we went up 1.2 mil in the context of a large bond, and it was much less than we told the voters, and the voters approved. Last year, we clawed most of the rest of that back, right, with a 1 mil tax cut. I say all that because I don't think we're going to be in a place of holding things flat or giving a tax cut this year. I fear, you know, if you just look at contractual increases in salaries and benefits, energy costs, gas costs for buses, you're already up to about 450,000 in increase, and I just don't see any way to shave that. So the conversation really is coming down to about the 350, 400,000 that's in really honestly new personnel. I'll state right up front that I think all of those personnel are important and needed in this district. I think they're money well spent. I also think we can't have a $858,000 increase in taxes, so I don't know where the rubber hits the road. One thing I would like to put out is we still are in a strong positive position. We heard our audit a couple of meetings ago about how much our undesignated fund balance went up. Right. To my mind, the goal is to keep that balance steady. Otherwise, it means we're taking taxes and putting it in the bank. Nobody's fault that happened. It was just a couple of really weird, funky budget years, and we were assuming the worst and had the best happen in the first year of COVID. And last year was a weird year, so just some really weird, funky budget years. But our bank balance effectively has gone up. It's not actually our bank balance; it's really the undesignated fund balance, but easier to think about as a bank balance. Our bank balance has gone up by quite a bit. So I don't necessarily want to be using that to, cover a budget gap this year of staff that we're going to be paying in perpetuity because we just draw it down. No, we can't use it on continuing costs, but there are several one-time costs in here that I think we should be looking at. I don't know if we're going to go down that road or not, but the maintenance truck is an example. That is legitimately capital costs. I don't know what they amortize the truck over, 7-10 years probably. So that strikes me as a kind of some of those kinds of creative one-time cost things. I think we need to be having we do have this big fund balance. The town does this all the time. They were sitting on $10 million at one point when they buy a new fire engine or something like that. It comes out of the fund balance. They don't make that hit the budget for a single year. I think we need to look at some, again, can't do it for continuing costs because that's just setting us up for more pain down the road. But one-time costs, we are in a nice position of having a very high fund balance. And I think we should be looking at spending that down on some capital costs. In a way, we already decided to do that with a multi-purchase, but I think there's some other items in the budget. Yeah, that's all I have for the moment. I just want to contextualize those the two bottom line numbers I always look at are tax impacts and expense increases. The expense increases is high, but it's not quite as high as it sounds when you look at 7% inflation and 2.5% of student enrollment. Tax number is still really high, but about 450 of that is already just committed between energy costs, inflation, contracted salary increases. So really the conversation's coming down to 400,000. I think there's some creative solutions like the undesignated fund for capital costs. I think, those signs, I think we need to be having scoreboards and padded seats. We need to be having a conversation about gate receipts, right? There's still some creative financing to do, but we're still going to come down to 300,000 or 400,000 of new positions that we're going to have a hard conversation about, even though I think all those positions are important.
Can I just mention one other thing that I made a note about and forgot to mention? Something you said reminded me. Lynn reminded me that we have a fuel stabilization reserve, and it has 75,000, and it's been there for a number of years. This might be the year to consider that kind of reserve to help offset, these sudden energy cost increases that we're seeing. We don't know how long these energy cost increases are going to last, but I think the reason it's there is to help offset spikes. And so that's another thing to consider.
I think we've got a good place to start, right? I mean, we got a lot tonight. A lot of stuff to consider and think about moving forward. Right?
Only the beginning.
Man, we're early in the process. Hopefully some things will improve, right? We can hope for higher tuition or lower health insurance, but be prepared in case those things don't happen, right? And I guess the one thing I'll say is I would agree with everything that Brian said. I would also agree with Meredith and Lynn's point about looking at that fuel stabilization fund. If this is like the kind of year we use it, then we shouldn't have that fund because we're never going to use it. This is about as big as an increase as we're going to get in those areas, I would hope. That all being said, I don't know that even with all of those things that we could go with all of the proposed increases here. So I would agree again with Brian that there's going to have to be some hard conversations about this, and some of these things, no matter how much they're needed, probably aren't going to be in there at the end of the day, or at least I would think they would all be in there at the end of the day. So we should all start thinking about, okay, if some stuff has to go, which in my opinion it probably does, what's that list look like? We get to this point every year, at some point, we ask Meredith and her team to make a list. Okay, what's like, you can't save all your children, which ones are you gonna toss first? So we're gonna have to start thinking about that.
Well, also at this time you maybe give us some direction on if we could start doing something or gathering information that might be helpful. It is a little early still, and so there's some other data points that will need to be added in. Is there anything at this point that you think would be helpful to bring back next meeting?
I think one thing that would help.
I'd like. You can go ahead, Brian. I can wait.
Just, yeah, I'll be really quick. One thing that would help me is all, the detailed costs. It would help me if we could start highlighting those in different colors. Like keep it black for the things that are just inflation and fuel costs. Maybe highlight the, the additional positions in a separate color, and highlight some of these capital expenses that could feasibly come out of the undesignated fund at a different color. So and maybe starting to put some totals on each of those three categories, so we can start to think about the different buckets a little differently. Go ahead, Beth.
And then I would add a fourth category, which is, Meredith, you mentioned that some of those sports related expenses, there's potential for those to come at least in part from other streams. So having a better sense of what those streams are, and yeah, that would make a fourth category.
I would just add to that, I don't know the details, and I expect the lumber costs for sets is real, but there's a brand new auditorium with a much larger seating capacity. I'm wondering if they have, I know they've spent their checkbook down to a much greater degree than sports, but if they have the capacity to raise those funds this year through increased ticket sales, especially if they're looking at programmatic enhancements like additional musicians.
We might also have rental fees, right? I mean, we talked about that. We're not, there's going to be community groups where maybe those fees wouldn't be involved. But we did, when we were discussing this auditorium, we did talk about the possibility of rental fees offsetting some of the increased costs for this. I think it's hard to know what that's going to look like. We don't know what demand's going to look like. It's not open yet. But we can start at least to think about that as a possibility, right?
And also just a thank you as well to everybody who helped develop this very in-depth first pass.
The other thing that I was planning on us bringing back next meeting is our just initial look at class size projections for next year.
Yep.
I think we feel like we'll have, except for kindergarten and ninth grade, we can take a look at that, but we'll continue to refine it through the spring. So we'll bring you that.
Since we have principal line items in two of the schools, it might be helpful. We've seen this data before, but just pull like a 10-year trend line in enrollment for the schools too. I think we're on the ground a little closer, realizing how student numbers have gone up, but it would just be helpful to, as we put more administrative support in there, to look at the maybe number of students and number of teachers in those buildings would be helpful to look at.
We can go back with stuff that easily, but
Yeah, that may not be possible, but the students we should be able to pull.
this will give us some good, discussion framing for next meeting.
Good first step, I think.
How would we go about finding what the new approximate number is for a mill?
I guess we'd have to make a query to the town.
I know that that's something that the board has been in the past interested in kind of considering.
Should be able to figure it out from the text.
Yeah, probably.
I think so.
I mean, to be honest, I don't know if I'm more interested in knowing our mill impact in old mill dollars or new mill dollars. We probably need to talk about both.
I think it's a significant distinction though, because if the value of someone's home has gone up significantly, and that's the reason why the new mills are now calibrated differently. I think those are the ones we need to use as opposed to looking at in terms of the old terms.
No, the mill rate doesn't change the value of people's homes.
No, I know it doesn't, but doesn't it go down as the home value goes up? When they do a re-up, when they do a,
Mill rate is now down because
Yeah.
it's now primarily due to the revaluation.
Right,
And we're at
exactly.
24 point something right now. I believe.
Yeah.
We were up. We were higher.
so if we're using the old mill rate, we're basically trying to hold people harmless to their increased asset value. But I don't think we should be doing that. We should be,
Oh, I agree, we shouldn't be
Yeah.
doing that. I think we need to look at both numbers. I
Yeah.
think people have a history and a context around the old mill rates, and you're right, people's taxes this year will be calculated with the new mill rate.
Right.
So,
that's what we should be looking at.
But the rate of what will be, if we get that number from the town of what represents a mill, 1 mil increase, that will be comparing it. That will allow people to compare apples to apples, even though the valuation changes. This is a 1 mil increase from this budget, and this was a 1 mil increase from, the budget 5 years ago. It's based on different valuations, but and different mill rates, but it's still, an increase, right? We can tell how much it went up because of this and how much it went up because of that. So.
right, I mean, the old was about 450,000 was a mill, right? If we raised taxes by 450,000, that turned into a 1 mil on people's homes. The new number's got to be 550, 600.
I would think so, but I mean, we should.
So I just think it's a little dishonest to say, oh, we only raised taxes a mill, but it's really 600,000, and everybody's used to a mill being 450. So,
As long as we're upfront about what we're talking about and say, okay, this is what, everybody understands what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's fine.
yep, we just have to be transparent. I think we need to carry both numbers this year.
Yep.
You ready to move on? Or not?
All right,
I guess we do have an agenda to finish, don't we?
We're not done.
I don't think the next item is going to be super fast either.
Yeah, this is a kind of a first look at a couple of concepts that we wanted to share. Our new concepts that we have been looking at and considering, and wanted to have you look at it and consider it and give some feedback. So we gave option A and option B calendars. Option A is kind of a carry forward of what we have done for the past several years. I'll say that both of these calendars align well with the UTC region in terms of, dissimilar days, trying to align so that we're not, wrecking the region's calendar requirements for our region. So I think UTC is coming back on the 29th. Their last day is right around the 15th or so. They have the same fall teacher workshop day. They have the same last day the week of Thanksgiving, the same last day in December, the same March day. The only day that's different in terms of full days is January 13th compared to the regional calendar. What's different across these two calendars, though, are really a shift in early release time. One of the challenges that we face that's really a growing challenge is time. And one of the things we provided is kind of a secondary document that helps outline all the things that are in our field of vision that is work that needs to be attended to. And we've certainly felt it the last couple of years with the stressors of the pandemic, but even just setting that aside, there's really this growing set of priorities that we have as a district and that we have committed to work on. We were talking about the equity framework tonight. That's going to take some significant time to work, through the goals that we established for our equity plan. We've been talking about data, and Tanya said something tonight, the power of data is not in looking at it, it's in using it. And so that's where we've identified that we really need to grow, and it takes time to work and develop that. The NEAS work continues. We have work that we want to do around K-12 curriculum and technology scope and sequence and vertical alignment. And really that's work that should be ongoing and really requires a commitment of time that if we just had that particular piece, I think it would take every bit of time we have on the calendar right now to accomplish that in the way that really should be done. And you can see just going down, across, schools, there are other important, initiatives that schools are trying to work on. So that's what the work ahead of us. And when we look at early release time, one of the things about early release time is it's intermittent. We get about, a little over 13 hours out of the set of days, early release days over the course of the school year. And when you combine that with the full daytime, we certainly put those days to good use, but there's just this backlog. And so when we were thinking about what to do about that, one of the things that has come up is, the need for more regular time to work, but also the counter side of how to do that in a way that's not really disruptive for, consistent schedules for our students, for families, and childcare and those kinds of needs. So the idea of the kind of weekly early dismissal is not a novel idea. It's done plenty of places, and we think what it provides is that consistent, sustained time to work, so you can build momentum on projects and not have to wait, a full month or more before you can kind of get back to something. And it helps there be more regular, systems that families and students would kind of, they would be in their routine. So for example, this year with the Orono Rec program, they said we really can't staff early release days. They just happen so intermittently and so infrequently that we just can't have staffing. We can't staff that kind of intermittent need. And so when I reached out to them about this, they said this would be something that would be easy for us to staff because it's, the need is regular. We would staff for it. It would be there. And I just have, the question would be, is that, the case with families that an hour more regularly is maybe no more a burden or maybe less troublesome to problem solve than, the once a month random early release. So that's just kind of a question. So we floated this out to some teacher groups to get feedback. The reviews are mixed, right? Not everyone loves this model. One of the feedback is, gosh, I'd rather take these hours and have just more full days. Well, that's problematic in other ways, right? Because we can't add all those dissimilar days to the region. Plus, we'd be expanding our contracts with all staff for more work days. And, that also comes back to not just a, contractual issue, but also a budgetary issue. And also, what does it do to the length of the school year? And I'm feeling, pretty compressed with Juneteenth, trying to not push past Juneteenth with, that's a new holiday. And when we push into, that third week of June, it just feels like that becomes a less productive time for school to be taking place. And so, the question is, if you add more days, do you back up into August? That also is, not a very well-liked proposition, partly because of the heat, partly because of when, people are in this region, I think accustomed to starting school. So, I'm not sure that there's a perfect solution out there. And I admit I was skeptical about the early dismissal solution to begin with, but the more I really thought about it and considered kind of the pros and cons, I felt like, this might be a solution for us to try to see if it helps us make headway on the, ever-growing list of priorities that we need to accomplish, and that we just don't have capacity to ever feel like we can accomplish what we need to accomplish. I think, option A could add in a few more early release days to try to get at that, but I think that's fraught with some challenges as well. So, I don't put forward either of these options feeling like they're perfect. And I think, there's option 3 that, we could probably come up with, that also like adding more full days, that is not perfect. It has some real challenges. So we bring this to you really for discussion. We laid out kind of a schedule of the way these days could be used. I think, one of the feedback from staff is an hour enough to feel like you can use it? And I think on the one hand, an hour goes fast, right? And we didn't like the hours when we had the 7 1-hour increments for one teacher workday. But I think that goes back to an hour a month just felt like it was too intermittent to really build momentum with something that you could sustain. So, I mean, I think you can, the high school is a good example of a school that's been making use of every little bit of time, every, department time, every faculty meeting time this year to accomplish some really important work with NIA. And when you can, pull from every bit of time, you can make use of an hour. And I think it can be useful. I think the other question is, the cost of instructional time, right? You're giving up that many hours with this model of instructional time. So that's a negative, right? Because we have 13 or so hours of early release time right now. There are, I counted them the other day, 37 early dismissals. So there's, 24 less hours of student instructional time. So I think I've explained the model, the thinking, and we modeled this after a couple of districts. There was a survey that the Curriculum Leaders Association that Meredith belongs to did, and we looked at that data, and districts are doing lots of different things to create time. Some are doing the early release, some are doing this model, some are doing nothing, right? So it's all over the place. I think we have some choices in front of us similarly and have to decide what fits our district and our needs. Meredith, you and I worked on this more than others. Do you have other things I haven't mentioned that you would add?
No, you've done a great job.
The question for this: if we went with the early release in Wednesday, like the Wednesdays, are there any of the Fridays we could eliminate? Just kind of make those hours back up. Like if we went an hour early every Wednesday, that's a lot of, what you said was 37 versus 16.
Yeah, I mean, that those days are contractual days with staff. So, staff have 187 total days in the calendar that we pay them for. Some of those are holidays, some of those are, actual work days. So if we, for example, change January 13th into a student day.
Yeah. So our contract goes by days, not by hours, is the issue. Because if our contracts went by hours, then that wouldn't be a problem.
Well, these hours are built into the contractual day already.
Well, right, but
Purple
I
hours.
guess the purple hour, but aren't like the early release days counted the same, and the green, teachers only days?
Those are all built into teachers' work schedules. So what we used to do with the January 13th is teachers would have to stay an hour after their contractual day for 7 days over the course of the year to work that day. So if we're not having teachers work on the 13th, I think that's a question of what happens for that day.
No, I mean, they would work on the 13th. They would just be seeing students all day on the 13th.
Well, then
And
we would
those-
finish one day earlier with students.
But, okay, but I'm talking about student instructional hours, because would we really finish one day earlier with students because we're taking away all those hours on Wednesdays from students?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we
mean,
can
that's
have
what I was-
one extra student day and, okay, I see what
You know
you're
what I'm saying? Like,
I see what you're saying.
I'm thinking about like the number of hours of instruction. I'm not thinking about like physical calendar days, because if we think about it, like we owe the students this many instructional hours in the year. And if we're gonna go to the Wednesday programming and take away an extra 24 instructional hours from their calendar, then I think we put those back in the form of full days where we don't have teacher only days, we have students in instruction to get the same number of instructional hours.
Doesn't that then add days to the teacher contract though?
No,
Well, I
no.
think he's saying you eliminate teacher workshop days.
Right, the teacher workshops become the every Wednesday.
And I think there is a continued need for some teacher workshop day time, because there's
Right,
some
but-
work that I think we would want to do outside of our increment.
Right, but if we eliminated 3 of those teacher workshop days to make the hour balance, I'm not advocating for this, I'm just saying that I'm really uncomfortable with taking away 24 hours of student instructional time.
I'm not sure what we gained if we do that, right? If we're regaining the time, then what have we gained for more PD time, right? So I'm not sure we've added PD time in that model.
I mean,
Just reconfigured
Yeah.
PD time.
yeah. I mean, I'd
Can I
rather,
jump in?
go ahead.
So I think that, something that we learned in part from discussions with the folks from Equity Alliance is that we have this tremendous circumstance of having small class sizes that are designed to make certain things possible that are not possible in other contexts, right? Like if you have a class of students that's 15, the rules are different than they are if that's a class of 30. And the possibilities really expand. And similarly, with our block schedule at the high school, we've been talking recently about how a block schedule similarly is designed to make possible in the course of one class period things that are not possible when the class period is 40 or 45 minutes long. One of the pieces that I think we have been grappling with pretty intensely up here at the high school is how do we maximize the impact of our instructional minutes? How do we plan lessons that are engaging and impactful and that pull folks in and move them forward? How do we capitalize on our class size? How do we essentially use all of the tools at our disposal in order to amplify the impact of the time that we do have with kids? One of the discussions right now up here is about developing a schedule that can help us minimize the time that students are in study halls and maximize the time that they're getting instruction. And all of those pieces, right, those investments stand to have significant impact, but they're only investments that we are able to make if we have time to work together to strategize and figure out how to do them. And so I say all this just because I think that it is worth noting that this isn't really it's not really an apples and apples discussion, in that it's not that every minute we put into PD is going to take away a minute of meaningful instruction from kids. I think that it really is about strategizing how is it that we as a learning community can bring to bear all of the resources and opportunities that we have in an effort to best serve all kids. And, you know, the reality is that teachers need time to work together in order to do that.
I mean, I would say, actually, I'm going to say exactly the same thing you said, Meredith, but I'm going to say it like a math major. We're losing 2% of instructional hours. So if those remaining instructional hours become 2% more efficient, it's a net gain. And it just seems really credible to me that that amount of time to work on, collectively work on pedagogy, work on best practices, even just working on learning communities, is going to result in a 2% gain in efficiency in those hours, you know, in quality and quantity of instructional content in those hours. So, I mean, it's exactly the same argument you were making, but I just look at it through a different lens. But that's to me the cutoff. If you don't think this professional development time is going to be used effectively enough to increase the quality of what's happening in the classroom by 2%, then it's a loss of instructional time. If it increases the quality of what's happening in the classroom by at least 2%, it's a net gain for the students. So that's how I look at it. Based on that, personally, between that fact, I personally think it's very credible we're going to get way more than a 2% gain in quality. I mean, when I got involved with the school board in this district, we were a bunch of excellent islands, right? A lot of individual teachers are doing great things in their classrooms, and there was just no coordination, communication, shared vision across the district. And, you know, I think there's been a lot of effort to put an expectation on that, and that has to come from somewhere. And the, you know, equity audit, yeah, all kinds of things. I'm more than convinced that this could be used efficiently. So personally, I would rank the schedule choices. Number one would be the every Wednesday. I also think there's a real sense in which that's easier for parents. I mean, sometime I want to have a conversation about financial assistance for parents that can't afford that rec program, but assuming that that's in place, I think it's easier for parents and it's a win for education. I would put our current calendar number 2, and I would put a calendar where we have more release days number 3. I think it's worse for kids, and it costs money, and this is not the year to be adding money. So I think it's worse for kids just because you know, there's a loss of position every time you're out of school, and being gone for an hour doesn't worry me very much. But being gone for a whole day, I think there's more memory loss for kids. So that's how you know, first, I probably should have started by saying I don't think the intention is to take a vote tonight. I think the intention is to get this out for feedback from the community and for us to listen to the community. And I certainly intend to listen to the community before I vote. But if I were to rank them today, I would rank option B first, option A second, and full release days third. So that's just where I come down.
I am wondering about something, and I may really kind of, I don't know, cause a stir, but I don't mean to, but it's one of these things that I've wondered. Has there been consideration about a late start as opposed to an early release, especially for, I can see the early release, you know, maybe working better for ASA families, because that maybe then, you know, it's linked to other aftercare. But when I think of middle school and high school, where they start so early, and it's just hard for them developmentally, but also B, then like it's linked to like after school activities, and then there's that random, and if we're considering an hour, you know, of like, okay, now you got to walk home, basically drop your backpack off and turn around and walk back. So just for like a continuity of experience. And then I will also add, as a former teacher, I have found that professional development in 1 hour increments is challenging, as other people mentioned, but it's a little more challenging at the end of the day than it is at the beginning of the day. Because you turn it on for the kids whenever they're in front of you, but so you just keep going, but kind of like having the fresh minds first thing is a potential space. So I'm just wondering if that's ever been discussed.
It has been discussed. I pulled out a survey when we started talking about this that we did maybe 4 years ago at this point, 3 or 4 years ago. And late start was, as you have cited, really problematic for younger families, families with younger children. Less problematic with children with, or families with older children. But overall, you know, early releases were preferred to late starts. As a district, I think we would need to decide, is there value in trying to all do the same thing? I think one of the things that was pointed out was, if you're not doing the same thing, then older siblings often care for younger siblings. And that was pointed out as a challenge that some families had with having different models. And you know, our dismissals don't really align well anyway to do vertical work, so that's not really a change. I think our vertical work would have to be done on full days, at least across the K-5 to 6-12 population. So, you know, I think in general, it feels a little disconnected to have different frameworks at different buildings. One set of buildings is doing late starts, the other's doing early dismissals. But I think it's not off the table as something that could be considered.
I know there are other schools in the area that do the 1 hour a week early dismissals. Are there any schools in the area that do late start, 1 hour late starts?
Meredith had all of that data. I don't know any in our immediate area, but there were some.
I could look into that and report back.
I think you worked at a district that had a late start. Did you say, Meredith? Or it was
I did. Yes, I was in a district where we did the late start. It was 1 hour and 15 minutes. And I think that that was a model that we used for a lot of the reasons that Beth talked about. And, you know, there is something about being fresh first thing in the morning that is very different once you get to that after last period feel. And I say that knowing that, you know, so much of the work that we have done at the high school this year has been in 1 hour increments after school. And what in a recent faculty discussion, a faculty member asserted that who had also had worked in districts with this model, that the efficacy comes when you have a specific task with a smaller group of people. And that if there is a group of people all focused on one thing and they have a deliverable or an objective that is to be accomplished in the end of the window, then over the course of many weeks, those deliverables and goals accumulate in a way that is a game changer.
Any other feedback that would help shape our work?
I have a question about the option A, the one that we've been kind of operating under. Again, not having been in these prior conversations about the calendar, but why, like, what was the reasoning behind somewhat, at least as a, you know, outsider, random Wednesdays, as opposed to having it like the first Wednesday of every month being an early release? Because I do agree that like it catches families off guard because there is no pattern to it. So I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, I think we try to space them in between other like full days as much as we can. Like, you know, we have the start of the school year and then we have October 7th. So we try to like split the difference and put one in between, and we try to, you know, put one in between October and then when we're, you know, the Thanksgiving break. So we try to spread them out, and that gets a little messy in January. That one has had some challenges in spacing that out. And this year when we added days, it didn't space well. And we've tried to actually address that a bit in this calendar, whereas this year we had, like in January, we had a Wednesday teacher workshop day and we moved it to a Friday so that for families, it was a little more aligned to be able to do something with that time than a Wednesday, and then, you know, a few days later, the MLK Day. And so, but that's why.
Yeah, that's helpful. I would say, you know, something maybe to consider though is to keep it consistent, even if it falls the same week as, you know, a day where the students aren't reporting. I don't know, it's like, okay, it's the first Wednesday of the month, right? Like if that is the option that ends up going forward. I tend to also feel like, as you know, again, I'm harkening back to my days as a teacher, like that consistency was also really helpful too, because I kind of had calendars both ways, where sometimes it fell really close to the full day of PD and it was like, oh, this feels close, but it was like, oh, it's, I think ours were Tuesdays. It's the first Tuesday. So this is what we're doing of the month. And because I think part of it too is, right, like the routines, that not just the families get into, but the teachers and staff are into as well to do this work. I don't have any strong feelings either way right now. I fully support professional development. I share the sentiment that Brian has shared, and Meredith as well, Meredith Diamond, about the value of PD shaping the value of instruction, and not, there is no mathematical equation to fully, for me, capture the value increase in that. So, but I understand your mathematical analogy, Brian. It's a good one. Just for me, a little different.
I've pulled up the data that I have about this pattern statewide. Of note, Mount Blue has late arrival 1 hour every Wednesday. Many districts have, you know, days sprinkled throughout, and that's the model more local. But if we look at, so MDI high school, teachers have from 7:30 to 8:30 every day as professional development time, and then students' day begins at 8:45. Cumberland has early release Wednesdays. Otis has a noon dismissal on every Friday. And Bucksport has an early release every Friday. Ellsworth has 2 hours every Friday. Pittsfield has 1 hour early release every Wednesday. So in terms of regionally, it seems like the model is definitely, you know, here and there sort of scattered. But in terms of a wider radius, say, you know, 1 to 1.5 hours within us, you do see this as a model that's used more frequently.
Meredith, can you go back to the MDI example? And so they start an hour, teachers have an hour free 1 day a week, is that what you said?
Every day.
And so what time do students get dismissed there?
You know, it's funny, I was just looking at their schedule today. I want to say that it is, I want to say it's around 2:30.
8:45 to 2:30. So they'd be getting a half
Running
hour,
an 8 block.
getting a half hour less a day than we get here, because our day starts at 8 and goes till 2:15 for high school.
I can tell you, just give me 1 second. Okay, so their daily schedule. So the daily schedule on their website, this is starting November 29th of this year, or last year. So I'm not sure if that changed since this data was gathered. But first block begins at 8:55 in the morning. They have 4 blocks with an advisory period, a 10-minute advisory period, and they are dismissed at 2:15.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other feedback from the board? We've still got a ways to go, so but I don't want to cut feedback on this, and we will discuss this again, but anything to help the administration going forward?
I'm not gonna vote for any of them.
You're basically a neutral vote on schedule because you've already thrown your
The only
vote
option
away.
I'd vote for is one that hasn't been mentioned, which is fewer earlier release days, so, but that's not on the table, so we don't need to beat that drum.
All right,
No, all I was gonna say is the, whether you view it as an unfortunate or a fortunate reality is that we've taken on more work and that work just doesn't get done on its own. Especially with the whole equity thing, and you gave us this list, right, of all this work that needs to get done, and it doesn't get done on its own, and it doesn't fall to one person, and it needs to get done. So
I didn't see any co-curricular nominations. Am I missing something?
No.
Oh, okay. So next up, we have policies. We've been talking about this for a while, but this has been through curriculum committee and policy committee a couple of times now. So we're bringing forward policy IHA for a first read. This is a policy on the edits you see are edits made in the policy subcommittee from the first draft. This is, it starts from a Drummond and Woodson policy that deviates pretty substantially. The goal here really was just to capture all of the curricular mandates in one place. We kind of have them tucked into a policy AC at the moment. And when this comes back from a second read, we'll bring edits to AC to take them out of there. But really, there were several new mandates. The genocide studies is a new mandate this year, as is the African-American studies were new mandates this year. We're like, well, where's that go? How do we keep track of that? And especially as we're sitting here with the Wabanaki Studies Committee, realizing there was a mandate that came through, whatever it was, 18 years ago or something, and we largely lost, not completely, but largely lost track of that. So we just want one place. This is not even really curriculum. This is like curriculum directions, where it all sits in one place. And this is set up to parallel the main state law. If you go to 20 MRSA 28, if you'll go to the state law on curriculum, there it is, 28 chapter 207. They set out 3 areas. Every school district shall follow the main system of learning results and guiding principles. There should be additional further topics covered. This is where things like Maine studies and then Native American studies and then genocide studies and African American studies got added in. There's some other random places where state mandates go in, like the K-5 instruction on child abuse was in a section of the law dealing with child abuse. And then the third area is local preference set by the board. And we had those already incorporated as well, including continuous K-12, not just meeting some learning standards, but ongoing repeated instruction in the visual and performing arts and world languages. We added about 5 years ago. Guidance counselors brought forth comprehensive sexuality education and suicide prevention, social emotional learning of work habits. I don't think has ever been written into a policy, but it's certainly been a long-standing practice in this district. And at the last policy committee meeting, we really realized that it may not be in the main learning standards, but digital literacy and citizenship is really an important, knowing when you're going to a website that's telling you a story or a website that's got some basis in fact and, how to stay safe on the internet, all those kinds of questions. So that should be added in too. So this is the policy it's presented. Like I said, it's been through a pretty heavyweight process at this point. So I would make a motion to recognize the first read of policy IHA as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion, questions, comments? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and do a roll call. Beth?
Aye.
Jake?
aye.
Patrick?
Hi.
Mark? Aye. I also vote aye. The next 3 are just small revisions coming out of our rolling policy review. So GCSA is employee computer use. This was reviewed by the tech committee and then brought to the policy committee. We still have our comments in. A lot of that was about practice. The only actual changes were we updated this for technology in the first paragraph, recognizing in particular that software and cloud resources are, you know, school district resources, which are governed by policy as well. It's no longer just about the little computer that you're carrying around. So that's really the only change. I would make a motion to adopt the revised version of policy GCSA, employee computer and internet use. Is there a second?
A second.
Any discussion? And I should point out, we're going to get to the student one in a minute, but it's got the same changes unless you think that it's not parallel. Any other questions or comments?
What are peripherals?
Things like printers, you know, they call them different things, but cigarette card, playing card pack, hard drives,
External hard drive.
external hard drives.
Scanner.
I wonder if it's worth putting like an IE note in there, right? This way, because it's for the employees, right? Like, so it's super clear. I didn't know what peripheral was. Maybe like everybody else in the world does. But if it's a policy, we want to make sure people can have it accessible to them and know exactly the expectation.
I think it's a growing set of tools. So I guess I would be
It's always
hesitant to
changing.
try to list an exhaustive list of peripherals. I think that's a catch-all phrase for tech tools that don't fall into like a firm, this is a laptop, this is a tablet. So it might be a hard.
Yeah, I wasn't asking for an exhaustive list, just one or two examples so that I just was like, if I have a question, I would imagine other people would, but maybe they wouldn't.
I don't know, I guess I just hesitate because, yeah, I just want this policy to last more than 2 years. And the more specific we get, the shorter life it's going to be. But you know, to your point, I think all these comments that showed up down below is about education, and we did have staff about this policy. And we did have a healthy discussion about ways in which we can make a more robust communication and education to the staff. So maybe we can incorporate that information there. All right, we'll go ahead and take a vote. I did do a motion, right?
Yes, motion and second.
Motion and second, yep. So Beth,
As it stands, no.
okay, Jake,
Aye.
Patrick,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
I also vote aye. Next up, let's just do the IJNBB, even though it's a slight rejig of the agenda since it's the parallel one. This is student use. And whoops. Google Drive is not cooperating with me. But I can say it's the exact same thing. I went through the tech committee. We had discussion about the training on this. And so that was a good discussion about practice, but not changing the policy. But we did want to update the list of, you know, in particular, I think Google Drive is a very big thing at this point. Everybody in the district uses it. And people need to know that whatever is prohibited in here, you know, using porn or committing crimes, is certainly applies to Google Drive. So the cloud and software was the big thing we were getting at. So I would make a motion to adopt policy IJNBB as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? I'm noticing we did not lowercase the I and add the word peripherals. Would be most parallel if we did that. People think that's a good idea, or do we just want to leave it as is?
I think this one says other devices. Kind of that's the catch-all phrase.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. I think I can live with a capital I on the internet still, so let's just leave it as is. Any other discussion? All right, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Beth,
Aye.
Jake,
Aye.
Patrick,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
I also vote aye. And the last one is, I think, the last of our catching up on the special education policies, IHBAI. And it looks like a big change, except all of that text was redundant with IHBAI-R. So really, we're just, you can see in that last paragraph, it's not crossed out, we're pointing people to the IHBAI-R. And the other thing we did, based on a recommendation from Lisa, is we changed procedure, because it wasn't really a procedure, it was sort of a mix of procedures and criteria, changes to the word criteria. So I would make a motion to approve policy IHBAI as presented.
I'll second.
Any discussion or questions? We'll go ahead and vote. Beth?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Patrick? Aye. Mark? Aye. I also vote aye. Next up, we have the new course approvals. All of these pass through the curriculum committee. Coming forward to the board, I think I would, unless somebody objects, I would just like to approve them as a package. I think that somewhat reflects the fact that work's been done at the detailed level down at the curriculum committee. So I would make a motion to approve the 7 new courses presented at Orono High School as listed in the agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion, questions? They look like great courses. You know, the honors courses are going to provide some more stretch for kids. We've got some neat classes in the English department. I think the science and U class is a really fun class. It's kind of in that theme of digital literacy and citizenship, but this is sort of scientific literacy and citizenship, which is a big issue these days. And I think the theater production class is going to give an option to a lot of kids who like to work with their hands and don't necessarily like to read thousands of pages of books as homework. So, as well as just kids who like theater. So I think that's a great diversity of offerings coming forward. Any other questions or comments? We'll go ahead.
I
and
do.
vote.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I was curious about the honors physics. My understanding from reading the synopsis is that it's because of the AP course being like requiring calculus, the AP physics course. My understanding of AP physics is that there are 2 different AP physics, a conceptual based one that does not require calculus. And it sounds like what's currently being offered, which requires calculus. It's like, I always get them confused. There's A and B, I think, or A, B, and C. It's changed probably a little while since I was teaching high school science. So I was just wondering, what was the reasoning for not doing an AP course, since it sounds like we're moving a lot towards AP courses, but rather the honors physics?
So something that I had a conversation with a parent recently who is also on the curriculum committee, and the question that was posed was, are we just thinking about, or are we mostly thinking about our honors and AP kids, and is that where we're putting all of our energy? You know, so something that I tried to do was expand the context and create an understanding of how, you know, with the faculty hour size and a school hour size, really it's this jigsaw puzzle of how do we create offerings. So, you know, one of the pieces I pointed out was that AP Seminar is a course that's going to be taught in the social studies department by our Chapter 104 faculty. And the instruction of that course by that teacher, even though that's an AP course, is creating capacity for the teaching of 2 other courses by a social studies faculty member that have not been taught in the recent past because we haven't had the capacity. So because the AP Seminar exists, we are also going to be able to offer practical law and politics and the election process, which I believe is in the explanation. So I apologize for the redundancy. But with our physics offering, so currently we sort of have 2 ends of the physics spectrum, right? We have engineering physics intended for Algebra 2 students, and then AP Physics intended for calculus students. And the goal really was having a full range of physics offerings for students. So by having an honors physics course, it really fills out that middle part so that we have a more traditional college prep physics alongside the advanced AP Physics and engineering physics for algebra students.
Thanks. And I appreciate that larger context. Yeah, because when you look at the list, it definitely looks, you know, honor AP heavy. And then there are important questions about students who are not taking those courses and what's available for them. Those 2 social studies courses sound awesome. I guess the one thing though I'm still wondering about though is if it's meant as a college prep course, I am not like a huge, you know, despite having taught AP science, I'm not one who always says, yes, that's what you should do. I'm just wondering how much this course potentially aligns with that particular conceptual based AP course. And is there, you know, is there opportunity to revisit that? Because it would be if, you know, a lot of students are taking that course and it's very closely aligned with that AP course, it would kind of seem a shame not to have it be an AP option, you know, for that college credit. So that's my wondering.
I wish I could answer that question for you. And unfortunately, I am not the person to answer that question for you.
Okay.
But I would be happy to put you in touch with Todd Hillier, who is the faculty member who will be teaching that course. And he and Jeff Owen worked together to develop the proposal. And so I am sure that they would be able to dialogue with you in a way that hopefully would create for you the understanding I am unable to offer tonight.
I totally understand. Okay, thank you.
My understanding is if you want to build a, you know, fall in the middle between engineering physics, which is very hands-on and very equation light, right, and calculus AP physics, the conceptual AP physics is much closer to the calculus physics than it would be to the engineering physics. So this course, as proposed, not being an AP class, is falling much more in the middle between the 2 physics classes we have. Whereas the conceptual AP physics would be, you know, in terms of material covered, would be much more rigorous than this class and closer to the calculus AP physics.
I think it's also part of this idea of what the label of honors actually entails at Orono High School, which is probably different than what you're thinking that it entails.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? We're ready to vote. Beth?
Aye.
Jake?
Aye.
Patrick? Aye. Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Next up, substitute teaching, pay increase.
I put a document in your folder today. I think it's in your packet that Rachel printed as well. You may recall we talked about sub rates in December. We did a survey of the area. We raised sub rates for 2 reasons. One, to make sure we were keeping in alignment with minimum wage changes. And secondly, in a survey of the region, you know, at that time, our change was aligning with where people around us, you know, were. And since that time, the picture has changed again. And, you know, our sub shortage has been very dire at times. And, you know, I think that if raising the sub pay can help bolster our available subs, it's worth that investment. You know, I've seen there's a full range. I updated the rates in the far right column here. You can see that, you know, with the change I'm recommending, we're at the top end of certainly what's available locally around us. And with the certification little bump, and we have, I think, 5 subs who are on our list who are fully certified. Would, you know, those subs are really in some cases also very experienced, and so that's a real asset to us to try to compensate more for that. So, you know, one of the differences you see, I mean, people do this differently across districts. One of the things that you see here are long-term sub rates in some districts, and when we get to a long-term situation, we actually go to our daily rate for our base salary step. So our long-term sub rate is the best on this list. We pay, you know, much higher than other districts because we go to that per diem entry-level pay rate for our teacher salary scale. But I think changing the interim sub rate to 105 for non-certified subs, and then the 120 a day for those with active main teaching certification is the place that will hopefully help us remain or become more competitive to get subs in. We have had a nice bump in our sub list. I think the new semester of students coming in has helped us. We've also just had some interest from just, you know, people hearing about our sub need and putting it in a couple of emails out to staff. We did get some traction with some new applications. We're short on Tuesdays and Thursdays because more of the students have availability who are coming from university on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So we still have a shortage, but the problem is becoming less acute, I would say. So hopefully this change will also help, you know, move us further down that kind of dire place we have been for the first semester.
I would make a motion to authorize increasing substitute teacher pay rates to 105 for non-certified and 120 for active main teaching certification. Is there a second?
I will second.
Any further discussion or comments? All right, we'll go ahead and vote. Beth?
Aye.
Jake?
Aye.
Patrick?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. We are getting close to the end here, folks. Subcommittee reports, policy subcommittee. You've seen everything we've done. We're not meeting. Guess we are meeting before the next board meeting, but just roll it back, rolling through the audit policies. UTC?
UTC has extended an offer for a new director, Amanda Peterson, who was the interim director since the last director retired last year, was offered the job. My understanding is the committee had two finalists, both were very good, but Amanda was picked at the end, and the overall board acted on the recommendation of the committee. The search process had been done using the Maine School Management Association process and training for, you know, non-discrimination policies, et cetera. So it was a pretty tight process, and they had a pretty wide candidate search and narrowed it down over about a 2-month process. So it was a pretty quick process, but they need to get some input.
Great, good to hear. Anything from Spruce?
Yeah, we are supposed to have a meeting this Thursday, and I just got an email that it's been postponed till March 17th. So that's when we're meeting next. And I've been told that there's going to be some budgetary decisions to make at that time.
Okay, curriculum subcommittee.
We saw pretty much everything was the new course stuff for
Right.
the most part.
Some discussion of goals and longer term things, but facilities and building committee. Still have building committee in my calendar for tomorrow, but I think we canceled that. Is that correct?
No, we just-
Oh, okay, so it's still on. Okay,
We may start earlier, right?
Well, if Robin, I need to see if Robin can meet earlier. We have several conflicts tomorrow night, I think, at 6, so
okay.
the meeting's from 5 to 6.
5 to 6 tomorrow. Building committee, facilities, not a lot of update. Ponds, nothing's going to happen. We had a lot of talk today in the construction meeting, but ponds, nothing's going to happen until spring. The auditorium is still proceeding apace.
Probably the ESRA.
That's a good point. So we were awarded, we put in an SRF for application for the ventilation down in the 1-2 wing at ASA. We did not get awarded anywhere close to the full amount of it. There was some question about how they were going to apply the $1 million per school cap, and they chose to apply it in the most restricted way. So we got, what was it, 119,000, of which about 70,000 is state reimbursable, and the rest would be either something we had to pay up front or a bond. I don't think a bond is particularly viable at this time, especially for that amount. We had set aside ESSER funds. So Meredith and Bill and I had a meeting with Honeywell today, just really trying to get a handle of what we could do with the money we have available. That conversation is still ongoing. I think we're still looking at trying to do, it may be that we have to scale it back, and maybe we get 3/4 of it. The goal is to move from this sort of centralized ventilation to unit vents, with like those units there that sit there on the wall and pull air in from outside. Those have just been a real blessing during COVID. They've really, let us localize the air. They also let us really ramp up air circulation to about 6 air changes per hour. So just kind of building on that model is where we're trying to head. So we're still looking at how much we're going to have to scale it back. And I mentioned, we have some undesignated funds that might go to capital projects. We also have some other maintenance funds, maintenance reserve funds. So we may be tapping into that more than we were hoping because of SRF and the way they applied their caps. But at the moment, we're still trying to find a way to squeeze that money together and get at least a substantial piece of the work done down at ASA. Just feels like we put them in alignment with the rest of the facilities, and teachers like them too because they have local control over their heating and cooling. So
We have to accept or decline the SRF money before our next meeting. But it's not a formal acceptance, it's just an intention to say, yeah, we're gonna proceed to the next step or not. So if we decide there's a viable option on the table, we would tell the state, yes, we're gonna move to the next step. And then we would need to come back and work on a plan for paying for this, and then, work on a resolution with the bond bank if we're able to move forward. But it really depends on what Honeywell brings back to us as to whether or not we think it's something we can put together. But I think we're going to have around 480,000 in our ESSER. We set that aside, and I looked at some calculations recently. I can push a little more to get it up to 480,000 there. That's not an opportunity we're going to have. That's a really big opportunity for us to do a significant project that will, pay dividends long term. So we're really trying to figure out what we can put together. So that's kind of, I think it's important for you to know that's going on, but more will come. I have an email out to the attorney about process, but last time we had to do just a board resolution for moving forward.
yeah, I think that's one, aside from wanting to get this work done, there's a couple of thoughts of, right, SRF is use it or lose it, and the ESSER money is use it or lose it. There are other places we could use it, but nothing I think is jumping out as a high priority as this. So given it's use it or lose it, it seems worth stretching to make it happen rather than just saying goodbye to the money. Okay. Any other business? Any requests for future agenda items?
I was going to just mention something before the future agenda items. I know there are not a lot of people left, but the reminder of the brown-tail moth removal event on the RSU 26 campus tomorrow. I think it's 3 to 5 p.m. So I know Bill's working on, I don't know if he's working on that event, but I know he's working on the brown-tail moth population on school ground. Any public comment? Mostly I see administrators who we've kept up way too late given their start times, but the floor is open for public comment. Not
Not seeing any. So our next meeting is March 8th. Regular time, 6 p.m. in person or Zoom. I'll also just add that's election day and there are school board candidates up for elections. I would encourage you all to turn out and vote. A lot of very competitive town council races too. So think about voting and then coming to a school board meeting on March 8th. Any requests for information and follow-up?
Sounds exciting, especially the school board part.
Yeah. And then I would motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. All right, roll call. Beth,
I
Jake,
Aye.
Patrick,
Aye.
Mark. Aye. Also vote aye. Thank you, everybody. I know that was a really long one.
Thank you, everyone.